Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Working the night shift at Riverside Memorial's emergency department wasn't for everyone, but I'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of it. As the front desk coordinator, I checked in patients between midnight and 8 a.m., watching the parade of minor emergencies and late-night accidents flow through our sliding glass doors. On this particular Wednesday night in March, the ED was unusually quiet. My coworker Jessica was on her break, heading to the cafeteria for her usual midnight coffee. I was chatting with Marcus, our security guard, about his daughter's upcoming graduation when the doors whispered open. A man walked in slowly, wearing a gray hoodie pulled low over his face. Something about his movements seemed off, like each step was carefully calculated. He had long, unwashed hair hanging past his shoulders, and his hands were trembling slightly. He approached the desk, keeping his head down. "I'm looking for Rachel Turner," he said softly. The name didn't ring any bells, but I checked our system anyway. No patients by that name had been admitted recently. When I told him this, he shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming on the counter. There was something unsettling about him that I couldn't quite place. His whole demeanor felt wrong, like someone trying to act normal but not quite managing it. "Are you sure?" he asked, still not meeting my eyes. "Maybe check again." His voice had an edge to it now, a barely contained tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Marcus must have sensed something too, because he moved closer to the desk. I double-checked the system, but got the same result. When I looked up to tell him, the man was already walking away. He moved stiffly, like a puppet on strings, and disappeared through the automatic doors without another word. Marcus and I exchanged glances. "That was weird," he said, but in an emergency department, weird was relative. Jessica came back from her break, and the next half hour passed normally. My shift ended at 4 a.m. The parking lot was dark, except for the sparse yellow circles cast by security lights. As I walked to my car, that same feeling of wrongness from earlier crept over me. I picked up my pace, fumbling for my keys. Just as I reached my car, I heard running footsteps behind me. I turned to see the same man from earlier sprinting toward me, his hood now down. His face twisted with an intensity that stopped my heart. I dove into my car, slamming the door just as he reached it. He pounded on my window, no longer trying to maintain that facade of normalcy. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, watching in my rearview mirror as security finally noticed and came running. The police arrived within minutes. When they checked the security footage, they discovered something chilling. He had been hiding in the backseat of my car when I arrived for my shift. He had gotten out while I was working, came into the ED to confirm I was working alone, and then waited for my shift to end. They found multiple smartphones in his car, all with different women's names. Rachel Turner was one of them. The police believe he had been stalking several hospital employees across different facilities, learning their routines and waiting for the right moment. He was caught a few days later, trying the same thing at another hospital. During the investigation, they found an entire notebook detailing my schedule, my car model, even which parking spot I usually took. He had been watching me for weeks, maybe months. I still work at Riverside, but now I park under the cameras, and security escorts us to our cars after dark. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of someone in a hoodie, and my heart will skip a beat. But I try not to let the fear control me. The experience taught me something, though. Sometimes that feeling of wrongness, that instinct that something isn't quite right, isn't paranoia. It's your survival instinct trying to warn you. These days, I always listen to it. The Atlas Business Center wasn't much to look at. Just another glass and steel office building in downtown Minneapolis. As the night security supervisor, I patrolled its 12 floors alone while the company trained my new partner. Winter in Minnesota meant the parking lot was usually empty by 6 p.m. Everyone hurrying home before the bitter cold set in. I didn't mind working solo. The quiet gave me time to think, and the building's state-of-the-art security system meant I rarely had any real concerns. That changed one frigid night in January, around 2 weeks into my solitary shifts. During my regular exterior patrol, I noticed 2 men standing across the street. They were partially hidden in the shadows between streetlights, both wearing dark winter coats. Something about the way they stood, completely still despite the freezing temperature, made me uneasy. They seemed to be watching the building, or maybe watching me. I maintained my route, but kept an eye on them. When I circled back 10 minutes later, they were gone. I made a mental note, but didn't think much more about it. Crime rates downtown had been climbing, but our building had never had any serious incidents. The next few hours passed uneventfully. Around 1 a.m., I decided to grab dinner in the break room. I was halfway through my sandwich when I heard something, a faint metallic scraping sound that didn't belong among the building's usual night noises. I set my food down and listened. The sound didn't repeat, but something felt wrong. I did a quick check of the security monitors. No alerts, no alarms triggered. The rational part of my brain said it was nothing, probably just the heating system or the old elevator settling. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. The break room was at the far end of a long corridor, shaped like an L. To reach the main security office, you had to walk past a series of closed doors, turn right, and continue down another hallway. At the corner was a heavy metal fire door that led to an emergency stairwell. As I approached that corner, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The padlock that normally secured the fire door was lying on the ground, cleanly cut in half. The door itself was slightly ajar. I backed away quietly, my heart pounding. If someone had broken in, how had they bypassed our alarm system? I hurried back to the security office, scanning through the surveillance footage. What I saw made my stomach drop. The 2 men I'd spotted earlier had circled around to the back of the building, while I was watching the front. They'd somehow disabled the lock on the fire door and slipped inside during the brief window when I was focused elsewhere. But the real shock came when I fast-forwarded through the footage. While I was in the break room, one of them had been hiding just on the other side of the door as I walked past. In the grainy footage, I could see him pressing himself against the wall, holding what appeared to be a weapon. The other man was crouched in a darkened office, waiting. I immediately called the police. When they arrived, they found evidence that the intruders had fled through the same fire door. They also discovered sophisticated electronic equipment that had been used to temporarily disable our security sensors. The company later revealed that several sensitive hard drives had been stolen, apparently containing valuable intellectual property. But what haunts me isn't the theft. It's knowing how close I came to walking into their trap. The police found zip ties and duct tape in a bag they left behind, suggesting they had plans beyond simple corporate espionage. The building now has security cameras in the stairwells, and the old fire doors have been replaced with ones that trigger immediate alarms. I have a partner on my shifts again, and we never patrol alone. But sometimes, when I'm walking those hallways late at night, I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't noticed that cut padlock? Night shifts at Fast Stop weren't exactly thrilling, but they gave me plenty of time to work on my online psychology degree. The small convenience store sat just off the highway in northern Arizona, where the desert nights could get surprisingly cold. Most evenings, I'd set up my laptop on the counter and study between customers. That night, the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and a steady rain was falling, unusual for the area. The weather kept most people home, which meant more time for my coursework. I had been completely absorbed in my studies for almost 2 hours when the door chime startled me. A man walked in, probably in his mid-30s, with a neatly trimmed beard and wearing a worn leather jacket. He wandered the aisles for a minute or two, then left without buying anything. I noticed his truck, an old Ford pickup, as he pulled out of the parking lot. I returned to my studies, but about 30 minutes later, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. The same truck was back, and the same man entered the store. This time, he walked straight to the counter. "Bathroom?" he asked, his voice oddly flat. There was something different about him now. His eyes seemed unfocused, distant, like he was looking through me rather than at me. "Around the corner," I said, gesturing to the single-occupancy restroom. He walked over and went inside. I tried to focus on my reading, but something felt off about the situation. Minutes ticked by. 5, then 10, then 15. No sounds came from the bathroom. No water running, no movement at all. 20 minutes passed, and my unease grew. I thought about checking on him, but remembered every horror movie where that exact decision led to disaster. Just as I was reaching for my phone to call my manager, a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. The officer circled around, slowing down as he passed the pickup truck. After a moment, he parked directly behind it and got out. When he entered the store, his hand was resting on his weapon. He asked if I was alone, then wanted to know if a man in a leather jacket had come in. When I pointed to the bathroom, the officer's expression darkened. He banged on the bathroom door, identifying himself as police. No response. With his weapon drawn, he used the store's key to unlock the door. The bathroom was empty. My confusion must have shown on my face because the officer quickly explained. There was an access panel to the building's plumbing in the ceiling. The man had climbed up and hidden in the crawl space. And he wasn't alone. After backup arrived, they found not only the first man, but also a second person hiding in the ceiling. In the pickup truck, they discovered items stolen from several other convenience stores, along with what they described as items of concern: rope, duct tape, and detailed maps marking the locations of all-night stores in 3 states. What I learned later was even more chilling. They had been following a pattern. They would case a store earlier in the night, then return when they were confident the clerk was alone. In other locations, they had waited until late in the shift when the employee was tired and less alert. The officer who saved me had recognized their truck from a police bulletin. In previous incidents, one man would hide in the store while the other circled back with their vehicle. They had already successfully abducted 2 other convenience store workers in the past month. I never worked another night shift after that. The incident changed how I view everyday situations. Sometimes danger hides in plain sight, wearing a leather jacket and asking to use the bathroom. These days, I do my studying at home, where the only thing in my ceiling is insulation. The Coffee Corner was one of those trendy drive-through espresso stands that are everywhere in Oregon. Tucked away on the outskirts of Eugene, we mainly served early morning commuters and college students. But my shift, 2 to 10 p.m., was usually quiet, especially during the winter months. The stand itself was tiny, maybe 12 feet square, with just enough room for our expensive espresso machine and a small counter where I could sit between customers. Large windows on 3 sides gave me a clear view of the surrounding area. The empty parking lot of an abandoned grocery store on one side, and dense Oregon forest on the other. That evening, a persistent drizzle had kept most people home. By 7 o'clock, I hadn't seen a customer in over 2 hours. I was scrolling through my phone when movement caught my eye. A tall figure walking across the parking lot. He was wearing dark clothes, completely soaked through. Despite the cold rain, he walked slowly, deliberately, like someone with nowhere particular to be. When he reached the stand, he just stood there, staring at me through the window with an unsettling blank expression. Something about him felt wrong. The way he held himself, the emptiness in his eyes, it set off every alarm bell in my head. After what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds, he walked away, disappearing around the corner of the stand. I tried to shake off the creepy feeling and return to my phone. But within minutes, I heard footsteps on the wooden platform outside. The man was pacing back and forth, his shoes making soft thuds on the wet wood. I couldn't see him from where I sat, but I could track his movement by sound: 4 steps one way, pause, 4 steps back. My heart was racing now. I reached for my phone to call my manager when I heard his voice, uncomfortably close to the service window. "Can you bring the coffee out here, please?" I glanced at the register. No one had placed an order. "I'm sorry," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, "but you'll need to come to the window to order first." "Just come out," he said, his tone flat and emotionless. "I want to talk to you." I pulled out my phone, but before I could dial, he started banging on the windows. The hollow thumping echoed through the small space as he moved from window to window, his face appearing briefly at each one, still wearing that empty expression. Just as I was dialing 911, he suddenly stopped. Through the window, I saw him walking toward the tree line. But he wasn't alone anymore. Several dark figures emerged from between the trees, all moving with the same deliberate slowness. The operator was still asking for my location when the man reached the edge of the parking lot. He turned back toward the stand, and even through the rain and darkness, I could see his expression had changed. The emptiness was gone, replaced by something much worse: anticipation. I was describing the situation to the operator when the man suddenly sprinted toward the stand. The others followed, their footsteps thundering on the wet pavement. I dropped to the floor, clutching my phone as they began pounding on all sides of the building. The next few minutes were a blur of terror. The whole stand shook with their attempts to break in. Just when I thought the windows would give way, police sirens cut through the night. The pounding stopped immediately, and through the windows, I could see the group running back toward the forest. The police arrived seconds later, but the men had vanished into the trees. They found fresh tire tracks behind the grocery store. The group had parked there and walked through the woods to avoid being seen. The investigation revealed something chilling. Several other coffee stands in the area had reported similar incidents, but with tragic endings. 2 baristas had disappeared during night shifts in the past month. In both cases, witnesses reported seeing a tall man in dark clothes walking around the stands earlier in the evening. They never caught the group, but the coffee company installed panic buttons and security cameras at all their locations. I switched to morning shifts and never worked alone again. But sometimes, when I hear footsteps outside or see someone walking slowly through a parking lot, I remember that empty stare and the sound of fists on windows in the rain. My job as a traveling nurse often means staying in different cities for weeks at a time. This assignment brought me to a small town in Vermont during peak autumn season. Instead of another sterile hotel room, I decided to try VRBO, finding a charming cottage nestled in the mountains just outside of Burlington. The photos showed a modern A-frame house with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound deck offering stunning views of the fall foliage. The owner, an architect who spent most of the year in Boston, had recently renovated it. At $200 a night, it seemed too good to pass up. I arrived late afternoon, the October sun already dipping behind the mountains, painting the maple trees in shades of gold and crimson. The house was even more beautiful in person, though the gravel drive leading to it wound through increasingly dense forest. My closest neighbors were at least a quarter-mile away, their rooftops barely visible through the trees. After settling in and unpacking my medical scrubs for the next day's shift, I decided to relax with a movie. The living room featured a massive stone fireplace and comfortable leather furniture. As darkness fell, the wall of windows reflected the glow of my laptop screen like black mirrors. Around 9, I heard footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves outside. The sound was deliberate, slow someone walking around the perimeter of the house. I muted my movie and listened, my heart beginning to race. The footsteps continued to the back of the house, then stopped. I tried to rationalize it, probably just local wildlife. Vermont had plenty of deer, and even the occasional moose. But something about the rhythm of those steps had been too measured, too human. Moving to the window, I peered out into the darkness. The motion-activated security light suddenly flickered on, and I caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the edge of the woods. They were staring directly at the house, completely still despite being caught in the light. I quickly stepped back from the window, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Would they even be able to find this place quickly enough? Before I could decide, the security light clicked off, plunging the yard back into darkness. For the next half hour, I sat frozen on the couch, straining to hear any sound over my pounding heart. Just as I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard it, the distinctive creak of someone walking across the deck. I moved to check the windows again, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My suitcase in the bedroom was open, items scattered around it. I was certain I'd closed it after unpacking. Someone had been inside the house while I was with my family earlier. The footsteps on the deck grew closer to the sliding glass door. Through the reflection in the window, I caught movement, a dark shape passing by. Without hesitation, I grabbed my car keys and phone and ran straight to my vehicle. As I backed down the driveway, my headlights swept across the front of the house. 3 men stood on the deck, no longer trying to hide. They watched me leave, their faces expressionless in the harsh light. I called 911 from the main road. When police searched the house, they found signs that someone had been living in the crawl space under the house, possibly for days. They also discovered a collection of items stolen from various vacation rentals in the area. Most disturbing of all was what they found in the attic, a notebook filled with detailed observations about my routine when I left for work, when I usually returned. These men had been watching me since the moment I arrived, learning my patterns, waiting for the right moment. The owner installed an advanced security system after that, but I never returned to the house. These days, I stick to busy hotels in well-lit areas. Sometimes I'll see photos of beautiful, secluded vacation rentals online. But all I can think about are those 3 figures standing on the deck, watching me drive away into the darkness. I was 18 and heading to my freshman year at the University of Montana, a 1,000-mile drive from my home in Southern California. My parents had helped me pack my ancient Toyota RAV4 with everything I'd need for dorm life, and I planned to split the journey into 2 days of driving. The first day went smoothly, but by the second night, I was deep in the most remote parts of Idaho. The GPS estimated I'd reach my hotel around 11, but with the sudden snowfall and icy roads, I knew it would be much later. Around 7, the dashboard lit up with a check engine warning. I wasn't exactly car savvy, but I knew enough to be concerned. The nearest town was still 40 miles away, and the snow was getting heavier, transforming the 2-lane highway into a white tunnel in my headlights. After another 15 minutes, my engine started making an ominous clicking sound. I spotted a sign for an upcoming gas station and decided to try to make it there. But fate had other plans. The engine suddenly died, leaving me coasting to a stop on the shoulder. I tried restarting the car several times, but it only made that same clicking sound. The temperature outside was dropping rapidly, and my phone showed no service. As I sat there wondering what to do, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A pickup truck pulled over behind me, its high beams flooding my car with light. A man got out and approached my window. He was older, maybe in his 50s, wearing heavy winter clothes and a thick beard dusted with snow. "Having trouble?" he asked, his breath visible in the cold air. I explained my situation, and he nodded thoughtfully. "Take the next exit back onto the highway," he said, pointing behind us. "That's your best bet." I stared at him, confused. The exit he was pointing to was a one-way ramp going the wrong direction. Using it would mean driving into oncoming traffic. When I pointed this out, he just repeated himself, more firmly this time. "Take the next exit back onto the highway." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I looked at the entrance ramp ahead, the correct way back to the highway. But he stepped closer, blocking my view. "The entrance ahead isn't safe," he said, still in that unnaturally calm voice. "Take the exit behind us." My instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. I thanked him for his help, but said I'd wait for a tow truck. He stood there for a moment, looking around almost nervously, before walking back to his truck. Against my better judgment, I decided to try starting my car one more time. To my surprise, it roared to life. I pulled back onto the highway, checking my mirrors constantly. The man followed at a distance, his high beams still blinding me. As I approached the entrance ramp he'd warned me about, I saw why he'd been so insistent I go the other way. The street lights were all dark, and in their place, I could make out several figures standing in the shadows. A vehicle was parked just off the road, its headlights off. I slammed on the accelerator, my tires spinning in the snow before finding grip. In my rearview mirror, I saw the figures running toward vehicles. The pickup truck behind me suddenly sped up, trying to block my path. I managed to stay ahead of them until I reached the next town, where I pulled into a crowded truck stop and called the police. They found tire tracks where the ambush had been set up, but the group was long gone. Later investigation revealed that several other drivers had gone missing along that stretch of highway in the past year. The man who'd stopped to help me had been trying to direct me into their trap. If my car hadn't started, or if I'd followed his directions, I made it to Montana the next day. But that experience changed how I travel. I never drive remote roads at night anymore, and I don't stop for anyone, no matter how helpful they seem. Sometimes I think about that man's calm voice as he tried to send me to my death, and I wonder how many others weren't as lucky as I was. College expenses in Boston aren't cheap, which is why I started doing Uber Eats deliveries on weekends. Usually, I stayed near campus where orders were constant and tips were decent. But on this particular Friday night in late November, orders around the university area had slowed to a trickle. Around 11, an order came through that caught my attention. The payout was unusually high, $25, for what looked like a simple sandwich delivery. The address was about 12 miles outside the city, far beyond my usual range, but the money was too good to pass up. The route took me away from Boston's bright lights and into the quieter suburbs. As the houses grew farther apart and street lights became scarcer, I started second-guessing my decision. My GPS guided me onto a narrow road that wound through dense New England forest. The neighborhood turned out to be a single dirt path branching off the main road. My headlights illuminated a hand-painted sign marking Pine Grove Road. Though there wasn't a pine tree in sight, just ancient oaks and maples, their bare November branches creating twisted shadows in my headlights. The path seemed to go on forever, the trees pressing in closer on both sides. Finally, I spotted what looked like a cabin at the end of the drive. It was small and dark, except for a single porch light that cast a weak yellow glow. As I parked, I noticed how unnaturally quiet it was. No crickets, no distant traffic, not even wind in the trees. Just absolute silence. The cabin looked abandoned, with boards covering some windows and dead leaves piled against its walls. Something felt very wrong about this situation. Then I heard what sounded like a large group of people talking and laughing from inside the dark cabin. The contrast between the seemingly abandoned exterior and the sounds of a party inside made my skin crawl. A man opened the door before I could knock. "Why don't you bring the food inside?" he said with an unsettling smile. "Everyone's excited to meet you." Behind him, I could still hear the sounds of a crowd, but looking past him, I saw only darkness. That's when I noticed the sound wasn't quite right. It had a mechanical quality to it, like someone playing a recording. The man's smile never wavered as he repeated his invitation, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. Without a word, I dropped the bag and ran back to my car. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man step onto the porch, no longer smiling. Then the party sounds abruptly cut off, like someone had pressed a stop button. As I threw my car into reverse, movement caught my eye. Multiple figures emerging from the woods around the cabin. In the brief sweep of my headlights, I caught glimpses of dark clothing and expressionless faces. I sped down the dirt path, trying to keep control on the loose gravel. When I finally reached the main road and had phone service again, I called the police. They investigated, but found the cabin empty. However, they discovered speakers hidden outside and evidence that someone had been squatting there. Most disturbing of all, they found similar reports from other delivery drivers in the area, all describing the same scenario: a remote cabin, sounds of a party, and a man trying to lure them inside. I was apparently the first one who hadn't fallen for their trap. I still do deliveries, but never outside the city limits and never after dark. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and see a lone porch light in the distance, I think about that cabin and what might have been waiting for me inside. I'd been working nights at Summit Station for almost 2 years. Our location just off the interstate in northern Colorado meant we got a mix of long-haul truckers and local regulars. Among them was a man who came in almost every night around 1 a.m. Thomas, according to his credit card, though he never volunteered his name himself. He was probably in his mid-40s, always wearing the same style of flannel shirt and work boots. There was something off about him from the start. He smiled too much, too widely, like someone who had learned about smiling from watching others, but couldn't quite get it right. At first, his visits were predictable. He'd browse the aisles, pick up random items, sometimes tools, sometimes snacks, never the same thing twice. He was always polite, but his cheerfulness felt forced, especially at that hour of the night. One night in February, he came in looking different. The perpetual smile was gone, replaced by an unsettling blank expression. His eyes looked hollow, almost feverish, and despite the freezing temperature outside, he was sweating. He paced the aisles frantically, muttering to himself. When he finally approached the counter, he grabbed an energy drink without looking at it. His hands were trembling, and I noticed dark stains on his knuckles that looked disturbingly like dried blood. As I rang up his purchase, he started asking unusual questions. How busy we were tonight when my shift ended. His tone was casual, but his eyes never left me, studying my reactions with an intensity that made my heart race. Before leaving, he asked if I would help him carry something from his truck. Despite knowing him as a regular customer, every instinct told me to refuse. I made an excuse about not being able to leave the register unattended. He stood there for a moment, that unnatural smile suddenly returning to his face. "I'll be right back then," he said, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. He walked out to his truck, got in the driver's side, but didn't drive away. I felt increasingly uneasy as I watched him sitting there, occasionally looking back at the store. Then I heard a loud thump from the back of the building. My blood ran cold when I looked at the security monitor and saw Thomas wasn't in his truck anymore. Within seconds, rapid footsteps approached from the stockroom. I grabbed my phone and ran for the front door, hearing what sounded like an angry shout behind me. I made it to my car just as Thomas burst out of the store, his face contorted with rage. I called the police as I drove away, watching him dive into his truck in my rearview mirror. They caught up with him a few miles down the interstate. What they found in his truck turned my stomach zip ties, duct tape, and evidence linking him to 3 missing persons cases in neighboring states. The investigation revealed he'd recently moved into a small cabin just outside town. Inside, they found what they described as a collection of items taken from various people: wallets, phones, pieces of clothing. He had been watching me for weeks, learning my routine, just waiting for the right moment. He hadn't chosen our store randomly either. Police discovered he'd been methodically targeting small gas stations, with female employees working alone at night. The other locations had security cameras that were either broken or easily disabled. Ours were new and connected to an off-site monitoring service, probably the only reason he had waited so long to make his move. I switched to day shifts after that, and the owner hired additional night staff. Sometimes I still think about Thomas and his practiced smile, wondering how many other lonely gas stations he visited before choosing ours, and how many people weren't as lucky as I was. Making deliveries for Grubhub was just a side gig to help cover my grad school expenses in Austin. Most nights I stuck to the busy downtown area, where tips were better and streets were well lit. But on this particular Monday night, all the good orders seemed to be coming from the outskirts of the city. Around 10 p.m., I picked up an order from a Thai restaurant, just a small soup and some spring rolls. The delivery address was for a business complex in North Austin's Tech Corridor. While not unusual, something about this order felt off. The customer's name was just listed as A. Smith, and they'd left unusually specific delivery instructions. The GPS led me to a modern 3-story office building, made almost entirely of glass and steel. The parking lot was completely empty, which wasn't surprising given the hour. The building's directory showed dozens of tech startups I'd never heard of. The delivery instructions said to enter through the main doors and leave the food outside room 232. I tried the front door. It was unlocked. The lobby was dark except for some dim emergency lighting that cast long shadows across the polished floor. A few emergency lights illuminated the hallway, creating pools of bluish light between stretches of darkness. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. As I passed the first few offices, I noticed they all had numbers in the 100s. 232 would be upstairs. In the middle of the hallway, a door to the stairwell was propped open with a doorstop. The stairwell itself was pitch black. I pulled out my phone to use as a flashlight and peered up the stairs. Complete darkness greeted me, swallowing my phone's weak light. Every rational part of my brain was telling me to leave. But I'd been doing this job long enough to know that negative reviews could seriously impact my ability to get good orders. Still, something felt very wrong about this situation. As I stood there debating, a door opened behind me. A man stepped out of one of the dark offices, wearing casual clothes that seemed out of place in a professional building. He pointed toward the dark stairwell. 232 is right up there. The way he said it made my skin crawl. He just stood there, staring at me with an intensity that felt predatory. When I didn't move, I saw his expression change, a flash of anger breaking through his calm demeanor. I dropped the bag and quickly walked toward the exit. As I reached the lobby, I heard footsteps on the stairs, not coming down, but going up. Multiple sets of footsteps. The security footage later showed what I'd narrowly avoided. There had been 2 more men hiding at the top of the stairs, waiting in the darkness. The man I'd seen had been trying to herd me toward them. The police investigation revealed something even more disturbing. The office building had reported multiple break-ins, but nothing was ever stolen. Instead, they found evidence that someone had been placing delivery orders to various empty offices, using different names and payment methods each time. The building's security cameras caught the same group of men, attempting this multiple times that week. Other delivery drivers had been smarter than me. They'd left the food in the lobby and departed. The police believed they were targeting specific drivers who followed the detailed delivery instructions to the letter. I still do deliveries, but I never enter buildings after hours anymore, no matter what the delivery instructions say. And when I drive past that office building at night, I always notice that one propped open stairwell door, wondering if someone else might fall for their trap. My name is Marcus Bennett, and I was 15 when this happened last September. I just started my sophomore year at high school in suburban Philadelphia, and my parents had finally started letting me stay home alone when they went out. On this particular Saturday night, my mom was at a conference in Pittsburgh, and my dad was working late at the hospital where he's a surgeon. My older sister Emma was away at college, so I had the house to myself. I'd spent most of the evening playing Overwatch with my friends Ryan and Jake, trash talking over our headsets between matches. Around 8 p.m., I heard our 2 golden retrievers, Scout and Luna, barking outside. This wasn't unusual. They often got excited about rabbits or passing cars. But something about their barking seemed different this time, more urgent and focused. Before I could check on them, I heard the distinct sound of our garage door opening and closing. My heart skipped a beat. Dad wasn't supposed to be home for hours. I pushed away from my desk and listened intently, the game forgotten. Then I heard footsteps downstairs, slow and deliberate, nothing like my dad's usual quick stride. I texted my friends that I needed to go and muted my computer. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and an unsettling silence filled the house. I crept to my bedroom door and looked down our upstairs hallway. Everything appeared normal, but something felt terribly wrong. Scout and Luna had stopped barking, which was strange. They always greeted Dad enthusiastically when he came home. Suddenly, a metallic beeping sound echoed from below. Someone trying to disarm our security system. A few seconds later, I heard a door open and close. The sound was too quiet to be our heavy front door. It had to be the door between the garage and the house. I pulled out my phone to call my dad, but before I could dial, footsteps creaked on our wooden stairs. I froze, watching in horror as a shadow appeared on the wall, cast by someone climbing the staircase. The shadow stopped moving. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, is that you?" The footsteps abruptly stopped. Then I heard movement in Emma's old room across the hall. Someone had already made it upstairs without me noticing. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped between two intruders. I dashed into my bathroom, the closest room with a door lock. Through the door, I could hear multiple sets of footsteps, now moving around upstairs. As I frantically dialed 911, I noticed the storage panel in my bathroom wall was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I saw an eye staring back at me. Pure terror gave me the strength to burst out of the bathroom and sprint downstairs. Behind me, I heard someone shout and heavy footsteps giving chase. I ran straight to our neighbor Officer Wilson's house. He was a police officer who had always told us to come to him if we ever felt unsafe. Officer Wilson immediately called for backup, while his wife stayed with me. What the police found was chilling. 3 men had broken in, one of whom had been hiding in the crawl space accessed through my bathroom wall panel. They had disabled our security system, using a device that copied the code when my dad had left for work that morning. The investigation revealed they had been watching our house for weeks, learning our routines. They knew exactly when everyone would be gone, and had even figured out how to keep our dogs quiet. They found opened cans of food in the backyard, laced with sleeping pills. My dad installed a more sophisticated security system after that, and we got cameras covering every angle of the house. Officer Wilson checks on me whenever my parents are away now, but I still can't shake the memory of that eye staring at me through the wall panel. Sometimes I wonder how long that man had been hiding there, watching and waiting, before I finally noticed the panel was open. As the night manager at River Edge Market in western Washington state, I was used to working alone. Our store wasn't huge, but with staffing shortages hitting everyone in the area, even our modest operation was struggling to keep positions filled. My usual overnight stocker had called in sick, leaving me to handle the entire inventory shipment by myself. I started my shift at 10, and by 10:15, the last day shift employee had left. The store felt different at night. The fluorescent lights humming overhead, empty aisles stretching into shadows at the back of the store. I focused on unpacking pallets of merchandise, trying to get everything done before morning. I was making good progress, working without breaks to keep on schedule. The repetitive task had me zoning out until something broke through my concentration. a soft tapping sound from the front of the store. Looking at my watch, I was surprised to see it was already 2 a.m. Walking to the front, I spotted a man standing outside the automatic doors, pressing his face against the glass. He was middle-aged, wearing a dark winter coat despite the mild October weather. When he saw me, he didn't wave or gesture. He just stared, unblinking. I approached cautiously, keeping the locked doors between us. "Can I help you?" His response was immediate but oddly flat. "Open the door." No explanation, no pleasantries, just the demand. "I'm sorry we're closed," I said, pointing to our hours posted clearly on the door. "We open at 6 a.m. The man's face didn't change expression, but he struck the glass with his fist, not hard enough to damage it, but the sudden aggression made me step back. After a few tense moments, he turned and walked toward the parking lot, disappearing into the darkness beyond our exterior lights. Shaken but determined to finish my work, I returned to stocking shelves. Maybe 15 minutes later, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the store. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before, sort of like metal scraping against metal. I hurried to the front, but the man wasn't there. The doors were still secure, but something felt wrong. Moving through the aisles, I made my way to our receiving area at the back of the store. The heavy metal door that was normally bolted shut was standing open, the lock mechanism completely missing. My blood ran cold as I realized what this meant. I turned to run for the front doors, but there he was, the same man, standing at the end of the aisle. His blank expression had transformed into something predatory, and I could now see he was holding something metallic in his right hand. Pure adrenaline took over. I sprinted past the registers and out through the automatic doors, which were still unlocked from the inside. I could hear footsteps pounding behind me as I ran across the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I caught glimpses of more figures emerging from the shadows between parked cars. I made it to my car and drove straight to the police station. When officers arrived at the store, they found the back door still open, but no sign of the men. However, the security footage revealed something chilling. While the man had been distracting me at the front, 2 others had been working on the back door. They'd brought professional tools to remove the entire locking mechanism. The footage also showed multiple vehicles parked in the far corner of the lot, engines running, waiting. This wasn't some random break-in, it was a coordinated plan, with at least 6 people involved. Whether they were after the store's money or had something worse in mind, I'll never know. The company installed new security cameras and an upgraded alarm system after that. They also stopped having anyone work alone at night. But sometimes when I'm locking up after a late shift, I'll catch myself studying the shadows in the parking lot, wondering if someone is waiting there, watching and planning. After 23 years hauling freight across the country, I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. The route from Atlanta to Seattle was one I'd driven dozens of times. A 4-day journey I could practically navigate in my sleep. But what happened on that rainy October night changed everything. I thought I knew about long-haul trucking. I was somewhere in western Montana, pushing through a nasty storm that had followed me since Idaho. The rain was coming down in sheets, cutting visibility to maybe 50 feet ahead of my Peterbilt. Most other trucks had already pulled into rest stops for the night. but I was trying to make up time after a delay in Boise. Around midnight, something strange happened. A pair of headlights suddenly appeared in my mirrors, though I hadn't seen any vehicles approach. It was a dark-colored SUV, riding dangerously close to my trailer. In these conditions, tailgating a semi was practically suicide. I maintained my speed, keeping a steady 55 through the rain. The SUV stayed right on my tail, so close that their headlights disappeared beneath my trailer. Then, without warning, they cut their lights completely. My heart rate picked up. In 23 years, I dealt with aggressive drivers, road rage, and plain old bad decisions. But this felt different. This felt calculated. I kept checking my mirrors, trying to spot any sign of the vehicle in the darkness. The wait station sign ahead promised a safe place to stop in 5 miles. But those 5 miles suddenly felt very long. The storm intensified, rain hammering against my cab like bullets. That's when I caught movement in my passenger side mirror. The SUV had pulled up alongside my truck. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could just make out the driver's silhouette. They were looking straight ahead, as if waiting for something. My CB radio crackled to life, but instead of voices, I heard only static and what sounded like metal scraping against metal. The SUV dropped back behind my trailer again, disappearing into the darkness. The way station was just ahead now, its lights a welcome beacon in the storm. I pulled in, noticing several other trucks already parked for the night. As I started to slow, I heard a loud thump from the back of my trailer. I parked in the middle of the lot, making sure I was well lit by the overhead lamps. Through my mirrors, I saw the SUV pull in and stop, still running dark. 2 men got out and walked toward the front of my trailer, while a third moved along the passenger side. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. That's when I noticed they had done something to my trailer's doors. Some kind of device was attached to the locking mechanism. They had been planning to break in while I was moving. I called 911, watching helplessly as the men worked on my trailer. One of them noticed me in the cab and shouted something to the others. They moved with practiced efficiency, like they'd done this many times before. Just when I thought I was about to become another statistic, state patrol cars pulled into the way station, responding to an unrelated call. The men scattered back to their vehicle and sped off into the night. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Several truckers had reported similar incidents along the same stretch of highway. A dark SUV appearing suddenly, following too close, then attempting to break into trailers while they were still moving. Some drivers had disappeared entirely, their trucks found abandoned at rest stops. The device they attached to my trailer was sophisticated, designed to bypass modern security systems. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a coordinated operation targeting specific types of cargo and drivers. I still drive long haul, but never alone at night anymore. I stick to convoys or daylight hours, and I've installed every security system available for my rig. But sometimes, when I'm driving through Montana in the rain, I'll catch myself obsessively checking my mirrors, waiting for headlights to appear out of nowhere. I was making the long drive from Phoenix to Dallas to visit my parents. Having just graduated from college, I couldn't afford a plane ticket, so I decided to make the 16-hour journey in my aging Honda Civic. I checked the car over before leaving, but my mechanical knowledge was limited to changing oil and filling washer fluid. The first signs of trouble appeared somewhere in eastern New Mexico. The check engine light flickered on just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. I wasn't too worried at first. The car seemed to be running fine, and I still had about 4 hours to go. But an hour later, the engine started making an ominous clicking sound. I checked my GPS. The next service station was 30 miles ahead. As the clicking grew louder, I realized I might not make it that far. The empty desert stretched endlessly on either side of the highway, broken only by scattered patches of scrub brush and the occasional rocky outcropping. Then the engine died completely. I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the growing darkness. The temperature was dropping rapidly. New Mexico nights can be surprisingly cold. I pulled out my phone, but the no service message mocked my attempts to call for help. As I sat there wondering what to do, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A black pickup truck slowed and pulled over behind me. Even with their brights on, I couldn't see the driver through their tinted windshield. A tall man emerged from the truck. In the harsh glare of his headlights, I could make out a weathered face and graying beard. He approached my window with an unsettling slowness, as if he had all the time in the world. "Battery trouble?" he asked, though I hadn't told him anything about my car's problems. His voice was oddly flat, emotionless. Something about him felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. I explained about the check engine light and the clicking sound. He nodded thoughtfully, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Take the dirt road about a mile back. It'll lead you to help." I knew there was no dirt road for miles. I'd been watching the landscape carefully since my car started having trouble. When I pointed this out, his demeanor changed subtly. The friendly facade cracked, revealing something harder underneath. "The road ahead isn't safe," he insisted, his voice taking on an edge. "Go back to the dirt road. I'll follow to make sure you get there okay." My instincts were screaming that this was wrong. I thanked him, but said I'd wait for a tow truck. He stood there for a long moment, staring at me through my window. In the reflection of my side mirror, I could see movement behind my car, more figures emerging from the truck. In desperation, I tried my engine one last time. To my amazement, it started. I didn't hesitate. I pulled back onto the highway and accelerated away. In my mirrors, I saw the man run back to his truck. They followed me, high beams blinding, until I reached the outskirts of the next town. I reported the incident to the state police, but they never found the truck or the men. Months later, I read about several disappearances along that same stretch of highway. The victims' cars were always found pulled over with mechanical problems, and witnesses reported seeing a black pickup truck in the area. I learned later that there was an abandoned quarry about 2 miles down the road where the man had tried to send me. The police found evidence that someone had been using it recently, including tire tracks from multiple vehicles and what they described as items of concern. I still make the drive to Dallas occasionally, but never at night, and I always have my car thoroughly checked before leaving. Sometimes I'll see a black pickup truck in my rearview mirror, and my heart will skip a beat, remembering that cold desert night and the man who tried to lead me off the highway to God knows what. Working as a medical courier in the Pacific Northwest meant long hours and unpredictable schedules, but the pay was worth it. I delivered everything from lab samples to specialized equipment, mostly between hospitals in the greater Portland area. The job got interesting after dark, when the city's constant rain created a moody atmosphere straight out of a noir film. One particularly wet night in late November, I was making deliveries in my Ford Escape when my GPS directed me onto an unfamiliar route. The address was for a private medical facility I'd never visited before, about 20 minutes outside the city limits. The rain intensified as I turned onto a narrow road that wound through dense forest. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness between the towering pines. Something about this delivery felt off private facilities usually scheduled pickups during regular hours. About 15 minutes in, I hit a pothole that nearly rattled my teeth loose. The entire street was in terrible condition, looking more abandoned than maintained. I slowed to a crawl, questioning whether my GPS had made a mistake. Finally, I spotted a driveway marked by a weathered sign that matched my delivery address. The path led through even denser forest before opening onto what looked like an old industrial complex. The building was a single-story concrete structure with few windows, its walls stained dark with age and moisture. I parked near the entrance, where a single security light cast weak yellow circles in the rain. The facility looked completely dark inside. Checking the delivery instructions again, I noticed they specifically requested the package be brought to a side entrance. Walking around the building, I found the door they'd mentioned. My instincts were screaming that something wasn't right, but I'd already driven all this way. Just as I reached for the door handle, I heard movement behind me. A man had appeared at the corner of the building. He was tall, wearing dark clothes that were completely soaked through. Despite the rain and cold, he moved with an unnatural stillness. "Right on time," he said, his voice oddly cheerful for the situation. Before I could respond, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, more figures emerging from the tree line. They moved with the same deliberate slowness, spreading out to cut off my path back to the car. The first man's demeanor suddenly changed. "Inside," he commanded, all pretense of friendliness gone. Now, instead of complying, I threw the package at him and sprinted toward my car. Behind me, I heard angry shouts and running footsteps splashing through puddles. I made it to my vehicle just as one of them reached for me, slamming the door on his outstretched hand. As I peeled out of the parking lot, my headlights swept across the entrance. Several vehicles had been hidden in the trees, their engines already running. In my rearview mirror, I saw multiple sets of headlights spring to life. I called 911 as soon as I had cell service again. The police investigation revealed something chilling. The medical facility had been abandoned for years. The order had been placed using stolen credentials from a legitimate medical courier service. They found evidence that multiple vehicles had been waiting there, and signs that the building had been recently occupied. Most disturbing of all, they discovered a room set up with restraints and what appeared to be medical equipment, though not the kind used for healing. The police believed this group had been targeting delivery drivers, learning their routes and habits. They'd use legitimate-looking orders to lure drivers to remote locations, counting on our professional dedication to overcome our instincts. I still work as a medical courier, but only during daylight hours now. I've learned to trust that feeling when something seems wrong, and I never make deliveries to unfamiliar addresses after dark. Sometimes, when I'm driving through the rain at dusk, I'll catch myself checking my mirrors, half expecting to see those headlights emerging from the trees again. The drive from Minneapolis to Detroit usually takes about 12 hours, but I'd gotten a late start leaving my friend's place. By 8 p.m., I was deep in the forests of northern Wisconsin, watching the sun disappear behind endless rows of pine trees. My old Volkswagen Jetta wasn't the most reliable car, but it was all I could afford on a teacher's salary. The further I drove, the more isolated everything became. The towns grew smaller and farther apart, until it felt like I was the only person left in the world. The radio could only pick up static, and my phone was struggling to maintain a signal. After 2 hours of seeing maybe 3 other vehicles, fatigue started to set in. Around 11 p.m., my headlights caught something unusual, a figure standing on the shoulder of the road. As I got closer, I could make out a man in his 40s, wearing a heavy canvas jacket despite the mild autumn weather. He had his thumb out, clearly looking for a ride. My first instinct was to keep driving. My mother's voice echoed in my head, warning me never to pick up strangers. But another part of me thought about how having someone to talk to might help keep me awake for the remaining 4 hours of my drive. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself slowing down. The man approached my passenger window, and I noticed he didn't have any bags with him, unusual for someone hitchhiking long distance. "Just need to get to the next town," he said, his voice carrying an odd timbre that set me on edge. Something about his eyes seemed wrong in the dim light of my car's interior. They looked empty. Still, I let him into the back seat, immediately regretting the decision, as an overwhelming sense of wrongness washed over me. He sat directly behind me, where I couldn't see him without turning around. "What brings you out here?" I asked, trying to make conversation. His response sent chills down my spine. "Oh, just walking in the woods. Got a bit lost along the way." His voice had changed slightly, gaining an unsettling edge. There were no walking trails in this area. Nothing but dense forest and private property for miles. I watched in my rearview mirror as he shifted in his seat, his eyes meeting mine in the reflection. The fake smile he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by an intense, predatory stare. "Pull over," he suddenly demanded. Now, when I hesitated, he leaned forward, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic in his hand. My heart nearly stopped when I realized what was happening. Before he could react, I slammed on my brakes. The unexpected stop threw him forward, giving me precious seconds to unlock my doors. I jumped out of the car, leaving it running in the middle of the road. As I ran toward the tree line, I heard more car doors opening, not just mine. Through the gaps between trees, I could see shadows moving, multiple figures converging on the road. They had vehicles hidden in the darkness, waiting. I crouched in the underbrush, hardly daring to breathe as I heard them moving through the forest. The man's voice carried through the trees, no longer attempting to sound friendly. "We know you're out here. Make this easy on yourself." After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, I heard their vehicle start up and drive away. When I finally made it back to the road, my car was still there, but something had been placed under the passenger seat, a worn duffel bag containing zip ties and duct tape. The police investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Several people had gone missing along this stretch of highway over the past year. Each disappearance followed the same pattern: a lone driver, a hitchhiker, and multiple vehicles lying in wait. I got lucky. The police believed my sudden stop had disrupted their usual routine, giving me the chance to escape. They found footprints from at least 6 different people in the area where I'd picked up the hitchhiker. These days, I only drive major highways, and never at night. When I see someone with their thumb out, I think about that empty stare in my rearview mirror and the voices in the darkness calling out for me. Some people weren't meant to be helped. Being a DoorDash driver in Nashville wasn't my dream job, but it helped pay for my music production classes. The late-night shifts were usually quiet, giving me time to listen to demo tracks between deliveries. That November night started like any other, with me cruising through the city in my Subaru Crosstrek, delivering mostly to college students and night shift workers. Around 11, I picked up an order from a local burger joint. The delivery address was in one of those new housing developments on the outskirts of town. You know, the kind that's still half-built, with empty lots between finished homes. The GPS said it would take about 20 minutes. The streets got darker and emptier as I left the city behind. Patches of fog had started rolling in, creating halos around the scattered street lights. Something felt off about this delivery, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. As I turned onto the final street, I noticed there wasn't a single light on in any of the houses. These weren't just dark houses, they looked completely vacant. No furniture visible through windows, no cars in driveways, not even garbage bins at the curb. I pulled up to the address, double-checking it against my app. The house was a modern 2-story, with pristine siding and empty flower beds. Like all the others, it was completely dark inside. My headlights reflected off the windows, making it impossible to see anything beyond the glass. Before I could even grab the food bag, a car pulled up behind me. Through my mirrors, I could see it was a black sedan with heavily tinted windows. The car just sat there, headlights off, engine running. Something about the situation made my skin crawl. I looked back at the house and noticed something I'd missed before: fresh footprints in the muddy grass, leading not to the front door, but around the side of the house. The car behind me hadn't moved. In fact, when I glanced in my mirror again, I realized the driver's door was slightly open, as if someone was getting ready to step out. That's when I noticed movement in my backseat reflection. Someone was crouched down behind my seat. Pure terror shot through me. I hadn't left my car unlocked, which meant they must have gotten in while I was picking up the order. Without hesitation, I slammed the car into drive and peeled away from the curb. The back door flew open, and a man in dark clothing tumbled out. In my mirrors, I saw him sprint to the black sedan, which immediately gave chase. As we raced through the empty development, more vehicles emerged from side streets. They'd been waiting, engines off, lights dark. I managed to stay ahead until I reached the main road, where I saw the most beautiful sight of my life. A police cruiser parked at the intersection. The vehicles behind me scattered instantly, disappearing back into the maze of empty streets. The police investigation revealed something chilling. The entire development was unoccupied. The houses were complete, but hadn't been sold yet. The delivery address didn't officially exist. They found evidence that multiple vehicles had been parked throughout the neighborhood, waiting. Most disturbing was what they found in my backseat. A backpack containing zip ties, duct tape, and detailed maps marking the locations of nearby empty properties. The man had been studying my delivery patterns, learning which areas I frequented. The police believed this group had been targeting delivery drivers across multiple platforms, using fake addresses in empty developments as traps. They'd wait for drivers to let their guard down, then block off all escape routes. I still do deliveries, but I've changed my habits completely. I never accept orders to addresses I don't recognize, and I always lock my car doors between stops. I've installed a dash cam and a motion sensor that alerts me if someone enters the car. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and see a perfectly dark house, I think about what was waiting for me in that empty development. I think about how close I came to becoming another missing person statistic, all because I assumed an unusual delivery was just another normal night on the job. I need to share this story, even though I know some people might find it hard to believe. What happened that night on the coastal road between Brighton and Eastbourne still haunts me. I've been a medical sales representative for almost 5 years now, driving countless miles across the south coast of England. But nothing compares to what I experienced that foggy night. For context, this particular stretch of road winds along the coastline, with chalk cliffs on one side and rolling hills on the other. It's roughly 30 miles of mostly desolate landscape, especially after dark. During the day, it's a picturesque drive with tourists stopping at viewpoints. But at night, it transforms into something else entirely. I was leaving Brighton after a late meeting with a local clinic. The weather had already started turning nasty, with that peculiar kind of English fog that seems to have a life of its own. I called Emma, my wife, to let her know about the weather situation. The forecast mentioned severe conditions, and driving through these coastal roads can be treacherous. I promised to check, and once I reached somewhere safer, I'd stopped at this old petrol station, one of those family-owned places that looks like it hasn't changed since the 1970s. The elderly owner mentioned something about being careful on the road, especially near the old Trucker's Bend. Apparently, there had been a horrible accident there back in the 80s. I didn't think much of it at the time, grabbed my coffee, and headed back out. The fog was getting thicker, surprisingly thick for an early summer evening. My headlights seemed to be swallowed by it, creating this eerie tunnel vision effect. The radio started crackling with static, which wasn't unusual in this area. But then something odd happened. Through the static, I could have sworn I heard a deep, rumbling sound, like a massive truck engine. But there were no other vehicles around. About 20 miles into my journey, the hail started. Not your typical English weather. These were proper ice chunks coming down hard and fast. Being from the area, I've seen my share of bad weather. But when hail starts falling in June, it's never a good sign. The storm was intensifying rapidly. I pulled over at a small levee, deciding to wait it out. The wind was howling now, and I could feel my car shaking slightly. It was completely dark out there, and I couldn't see any other cars or lights. Just me and the storm. I turned off the engine and lowered the passenger window slightly, hoping to get a better look at the weather. I had my high-powered medical sample case torch with me, the kind we use to check product details in dimly lit storage rooms. When I shone the light out into the darkness, scanning the horizon, something felt off. No lightning, no storm clouds swirling, just this oppressive darkness and fog. But then something caught my eye in my peripheral vision. There, right outside my driver's side window, was a figure. A man, but not quite right. He wore what looked like an old leather jacket, the kind lorry drivers used to wear decades ago. But it was torn and weathered beyond recognition. His face was pressed against my window, but what terrified me most were his eyes. They seemed to reflect the light like a cat's would, but there was something wrong about them. They were too bright, too intense. His face, God, that face. It was twisted into an unnatural grin, stretching far wider than any human mouth should. His teeth seemed too numerous, too sharp, like something from a nightmare. I was frozen in place, my heart nearly stopping in my chest. Then he raised his hand, pressing it against the window. His fingers were unnaturally long and pale, almost translucent in the fog. The window began to fog up from his touch, but it wasn't normal condensation. It spread in strange, swirling patterns that seemed to form shapes I couldn't quite comprehend. Through the fog on the glass, I could make out what looked like the scene of an accident, a jackknifed lorry, flames, chaos. The images seemed to move and shift in the condensation, telling a story I didn't want to understand. When I managed to snap out of my paralysis and start the car, the figure was gone. I drove away as fast as I safely could in those conditions, not even caring about the hail anymore. When I finally reached a well-lit petrol station, I pulled in, my hands shaking as I texted Emma. Later, I couldn't help but research the area. Turns out, in 1984, there was a horrible accident on that stretch of road. A lorry driver, caught in similar weather conditions, went off the road. They never found his body, but his jacket was found draped over the crash barrier, torn and weathered. The old petrol station owner wasn't surprised when I told him what happened. He just nodded slowly and said, "Ah, you've met old Jack then. He shows up sometimes in the fog, especially to lonely drivers. Some say he's still trying to warn people about that bend. I've driven that road many times since then, but only during daylight hours. If I have to make the journey at night, I take the longer inland route. Some things can't be explained, and some roads are better left untraveled after dark. The coastal road between Brighton and Eastbourne taught me that some stories aren't just stories, and sometimes the fog holds more than just moisture." I told this story before, but even now, years later, the memory of that night in the Carpathian Mountains sends chills down my spine. I was driving with Maria through the winding mountain roads of rural Romania, heading back to Bucharest after visiting her family in a small village near Brasov. It was around 3 in the morning, and the mountain roads were pitch black. the kind of darkness that seems to swallow everything except what's directly in front of your headlights. Maria was sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, so I kept the radio off, letting the quiet hum of our old Dacia's engine be the only sound accompanying us through the night. The GPS had decided to take us through a narrow mountain pass instead of the main highway. The locals called it Drumul-Lupului, the Wolf's Road. An elderly man at the last village we passed through had warned us about taking this route at night, muttering something about old spirits and hungry shadows. But I dismissed it as superstitious talk. The road was treacherous, with sharp turns hugging the mountainside. Warning signs about wildlife crossings appeared frequently, and I was especially cautious after Maria's cousin had told us about a recent accident involving a shepherd's truck and a large animal that had caused significant damage. As I approached a particularly sharp bend, I slowed down considerably, my headlights cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it, a figure emerging from the dense forest at the edge of the turn. At first, I thought it was a regular wolf, but as my lights fully illuminated the creature, I realized this was something else entirely. It was massive, far larger than any wolf I'd ever seen or heard about. Its shoulders stood as high as a man's waist, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. The creature's face was streaked with what looked like blood, dark and glistening in my headlights. But its eyes, they weren't the typical reflective eyes of a wild animal. They seemed to glow with an inner light, an unnatural amber color that spoke of something ancient and intelligent. I pulled the car to a stop just after the turn, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to wake Maria, my hand shaking as I reached over to touch her shoulder. In my rearview mirror, I could see the creature's massive shadow moving across the road with an almost deliberate slowness, its movements more calculated than any normal wolf. When Maria finally stirred, the creature had already disappeared into the darkness on the other side. She looked at me with sleepy confusion as I tried to explain what I'd seen, but she immediately became alert when I mentioned the size of the wolf. In her family's village, there were old stories about Vulpii Mari, the great wolves that roamed these mountains. Not regular wolves, they'd say, but something older, something that had walked these peaks since before humans built their first settlements here. Maria crossed herself instinctively, a habit from her grandmother, and told me to drive on without stopping until we reached the next town. She didn't dismiss my sighting like I expected. Instead, she grew quiet, occasionally glancing out into the darkness, as if expecting to see something following us. Later, when we reached the safety of a small mountain town, we stopped at an all-night cafe. The elderly owner, seeing our shaken state, asked if we traveled through Drumul-Lupului. When we nodded, she wasn't surprised. She told us that the great wolf appears to travelers on that road, especially during the dark hours between midnight and dawn. Some say it's a guardian of the old ways. Others believe it's something darker. A reminder that in these ancient mountains, humans are not always the apex predators. I've driven through many mountain passes since then, but I always take the main highway now, no matter how much longer the journey might be. Maria's family wasn't surprised by our story. They've lived in these mountains for generations and know that some legends aren't just stories. They understand that in the dark corners of the Carpathians, where the old forests meet the ancient paths, there are still things that defy our modern explanations. The image of that wolf, with its intelligent eyes and deliberate movements, still haunts my dreams. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night and pass through a particularly dark stretch of road, I find myself checking my mirrors, half expecting to see those glowing amber eyes emerging from the darkness. Some things you see change the way you understand the world, and my encounter on the Wolf's Road was one of them. I've been driving cargo trucks through the Moroccan desert for years now, transporting goods between the ancient city of Fes and the desert town of Urfaud. The route takes you through some of the most desolate landscapes. You can imagine endless stretches of sand and stone, where the modern world seems to fade away into timelessness. But out of all the strange things I've seen on these desert roads, nothing compares to what happened that night. This occurred during one of those long hauls through the desert, where the road stretches like a black ribbon across the sand. I had left Fes late in the afternoon, hoping to make it to Urfaud by early morning. The old men at the market had warned me about traveling at night, especially during the season when the hot winds blow from the Sahara. The desert has its own rules after dark, they would say, and not all who wander there are lost. Around 4 a.m, I decided to pull over at an old fuel station, one of those lonely outposts that seem to exist in a time of their own. The place was so isolated that sometimes weeks would pass without any customers, or so the old keeper had told me on previous stops. The desert was quiet that night, too quiet. Even the usual whisper of sand against metal had stopped. I parked my truck, turned off the engine, and decided to rest for a while. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional ping of my truck's cooling engine. That's when I first heard it, something hitting the cables between my cab and trailer. Not the usual sound of wind-blown sand, but deliberate movements, like someone or something was testing them. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the metal of my trailer. Heavy footsteps, like someone was climbing up there. In the desert, you learn to know your truck's every sound, and this was something else entirely. The whole vehicle shook with the weight of whatever was up there. Without thinking, I slammed my hand against the cab wall, hoping to scare away what I assumed must be some desert scavenger. The response I got wasn't what I expected. A human scream pierced the night air, but it wasn't a normal scream. It was distorted, almost like the person's voice was being carried through water. Then came the thud of something heavy falling from my trailer. Before I could process what was happening, I heard voices, multiple voices, calling out to each other in a dialect I couldn't quite place. It wasn't Arabic or Berber, but something older, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I quickly grabbed my keys and flashlight, throwing open the door. What I saw in the harsh beam of my light stopped me cold. Standing in front of my truck were several figures, maybe 6 or 7, all wearing traditional desert robes that seemed to shift and move in ways that didn't match the still air. They moved strangely, their movements jerky and unnatural, like they were trying to remember how to walk. When they noticed me, they didn't speak. They just exchanged glances with eyes that seemed to reflect my flashlight beam like cat's eyes would, but brighter, more intense. Their clothes were covered in sand, but not like they'd been traveling. It was as if they were made of sand themselves. "What do you want?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it over the desert silence. One of them spoke, voice trembling in an inhuman way. "We check for abandoned vehicles. Secure them. Make sure no one is left behind." The way they said it was wrong, like they were repeating words they'd heard but didn't understand. The group exchanged uncomfortable glances, and one of them stepped forward. The figure's movements were all wrong, like watching someone trying to imitate human movement, but not quite getting it right. When they opened their mouth to speak, only a long, dry breath came out, like wind over sand. "You need to leave," another one said, their voice carrying an urgency that seemed more like a warning than a threat. Now I didn't need to be told twice. I jumped back into my truck, slammed the door, and drove off into the night. I didn't stop until I reached the next proper town, my heart still racing. When I told the cafe owner what had happened, he just nodded slowly and touched the protective amulet hanging from his rearview mirror. Later, I learned that section of the desert road had a history. Local legends spoke of the desert's children spirits that would appear to travelers in human form, testing them, watching them. Some said they were jinn. Others claimed they were the ghosts of an ancient caravan that had been lost to the sand centuries ago. I still drive that route. I have to, it's my livelihood. But I never stop at that fuel station anymore, and I make sure to cross that stretch of desert in daylight. The old men at the market weren't just sharing superstitions. They were warning us about something real, something that lives in those ancient sands, something that comes out when the modern world sleeps and the old desert rules take hold. Sometimes, when I'm driving that route and the sun is setting, I catch glimpses of robed figures in my mirrors, standing motionless among the dunes. I don't look twice anymore. In the desert, especially at night, some things are better left unquestioned. I attended the prestigious rowing school at Lake Balaton in Hungary during the summer of '98. The lake, stretching like a vast mirror beneath the scorching Hungarian sun, was home to one of Eastern Europe's most respected youth rowing programs. While the experience taught me discipline and teamwork, it also left me with a deep-seated fear that still haunts me to this day. The rowing school was situated on the northern shore of Balaton, where the water was deeper and perfect for training. Our practice area had one long wooden pier stretching straight into the lake, with two floating platforms further out for advanced training. The second platform, positioned quite far from the shore, was rarely used, something I would later understand why. One particularly hot afternoon, our group of 13-13-year-olds got the ambitious idea to row out to the distant platform. Coach Kovac had always told us it was reserved for the senior team, which only made it more appealing to our teenage minds. The challenge seemed moderate, the distance was considerable, but we had been training all summer. As we approached the platform, I noticed something unusual on the boarding ladder. It was a strange-looking creature, unlike anything I'd seen before in the lake. It resembled a scorpion, but was adapted for water, with long, spindly legs spreading about 2 inches across. Its presence was odd, but at that moment it didn't seem particularly threatening. After the long row, we took a few minutes to rest on the platform, lying in the sun and feeling quite proud of our small act of rebellion. The wooden boards were warm against our backs, and the gentle rocking of the platform was almost hypnotic. We started horsing around, playing one of our usual games where we would all move to one corner of the platform, causing it to tilt and dip into the water. That's when everything went horribly wrong. As the corner of the platform sank and water began to flood over the edges, hundreds of water scorpions suddenly erupted from between the boards. They came pouring out in a horrifying mass, their dark bodies swarming over our feet and ankles. This platform was their territory, and we had just disturbed their nest. The panic was instant and absolute. We all screamed and jumped into the water, but the creatures were there too, clinging to us as we swam. I can still feel them now, their hard bodies against my skin, their legs tangling in my hair. The sensation was beyond horrifying. The adrenaline propelled us through the water, swimming faster than we ever had during training. By the time we reached the main pier, we were mercifully free of the creatures, but the trauma was already deeply etched in our minds. The image of lying there on the platform, completely unaware of the horror that lurked just inches beneath us, still makes my skin crawl. Later, when we finally worked up the courage to tell Coach Kovac what had happened, his face grew serious. He explained that the distant platform had been abandoned years ago, after similar incidents. The water scorpions, native to the deeper parts of Balaton, had made it their breeding ground. Local fishermen had tales about these creatures. They called them Visi Erdergurk, water devils, believing they were omens of misfortune. The old groundskeeper added his own perspective, telling us how these creatures had been appearing in greater numbers over the years. The lake has its own life, he said in his gravelly Hungarian, and sometimes it sends us warnings about entering places we shouldn't. The school installed new metal platforms the following year, but I had already completed my training by then. The incident changed something in me. To this day, I can't look at a dock or floating platform without wondering what might be hiding beneath it. The memory of those creatures erupting from their hidden sanctuary serves as a reminder that sometimes the most peaceful-looking places can harbor unexpected terrors. When I visited Lake Balaton years later, I noticed the distant platform was gone, removed after years of disuse. But standing on the shore, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, I couldn't help but think about what still lived in the deeper parts of the lake. Some experiences mark you forever, and my encounter with the water scorpions of Balaton taught me that nature always has more surprises waiting beneath the surface. This is something that's haunted me for years, a memory I can't shake no matter how hard I try. What happened on that stretch of Highland Road between Inverness and Aberdeen still sends chills through me every time I think about it. I've been driving cargo trucks through the Scottish Highlands for nearly 2 decades now. I'm used to the isolation, the way the mist rolls across the moors, and how the ancient standing stones loom out of the darkness. But that night was different. It was during that time of year when darkness seems to have a physical presence, when the old stories your grandmother told you about the fair folk don't seem quite so fictional anymore. It was around 3 in the morning, and I was making my usual run. The road was empty, just me, my truck, and the endless expanse of heather-covered hills stretching out on either side. I had my high beams on, cutting through a mist that seemed thicker than usual. There were no other vehicles in sight, just the occasional glimpse of ancient stone circles standing sentinel in the darkness. Then I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was a red deer crossing the road. They're common enough in these parts. But as I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. The shape wasn't moving like any animal I'd ever seen. It was standing upright, and that's when things started to feel wrong. I slowed down, now crawling along at about 30 miles per hour, trying to make sense of what I was seeing through the mist. My headlights finally revealed it clearly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a deer, and it wasn't fully human either. The figure stood in the middle of the road, wearing what looked like ancient Highland dress, a weathered plaid, and leather garments that seemed centuries old. But it was what was on its head that turned my blood to ice. Rising from its brow were enormous antlers, not like a costume or mask, but as if they were growing directly from its skull. They were massive, spreading wide like ancient branches, darker than the night around them. The being's face was gaunt and ancient, its skin the color of old parchment. But its eyes, dear God, its eyes, they glowed with an inner fire, an otherworldly amber light that spoke of something far older than humanity. The mouth was set in an expression that wasn't quite a smile, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. I couldn't take my eyes off it, even as every instinct screamed at me to run. The figure stood motionless, its head tilted slightly, watching my truck approach with those terrible, burning eyes. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel as I swerved into the opposite lane, trying to give it a wide berth. That's when it happened. As I passed, the creature lunged at my truck with impossible speed. In an instant, it crossed the distance between us, its long-fingered hands reaching out toward my vehicle. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. All I could do was drive, pushing my truck faster than I ever had before. I didn't stop until I reached Aberdeen, more than 30 miles away. When I finally pulled into a service station, my hands were still shaking. The attendant took one look at my face and asked if I'd seen him on the old road. Without waiting for my answer, he made the sign of the cross and touched an old iron charm hanging behind the counter. Later, I learned that section of road cuts through what was once sacred ground to the ancient Picts. The stone circles I'd seen were more than just historical monuments. They were markers for something older, something that still walked those hills. The locals called it the Horned One, a being from the old stories that was neither God nor devil, but something in between. The older drivers had tales about it, stories of it appearing on misty nights, particularly when the moon was dark. Some said it was Cernunnos himself, the ancient Celtic god of the wild, still guarding his territory. Others claimed it was something else, something that had walked those hills since before the first stones were raised. I still drive that route. I have to, it's my job. But I never drive it at night anymore, and I've learned to recognize the warning signs. When the mist grows thick and the air feels heavy with age, when the standing stones seem to loom closer to the road than they should, that's when I know it's time to find another route. The memory of that night stays with me. Sometimes when I'm driving through the highlands and the mist starts to roll in, I catch myself checking my mirrors, half expecting to see those glowing eyes and ancient antlers emerging from the darkness. I don't know what I encountered on that road, but I do know one thing some parts of Scotland still belong to the old powers, and sometimes they remind us that we're merely guests in their ancient domain. I've been working as a rescue boat operator along Norway's northern coast for years, patrolling the treacherous waters between Tromsø and Alta. When you're out there during the polar night, where darkness rules for months, you see things that challenge your understanding of reality. But nothing in my years of experience prepared me for what my partner Eric and I encountered that winter night. The Norwegian Sea can be merciless during winter. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the shimmer of stars and the occasional dance of the aurora borealis. We were following a regular patrol route, checking on the fishing boats that brave these waters even in the harshest conditions. The old fishermen always say these waters hold secrets from the time of the Vikings, but like most modern people, I'd always taken their tales as mere folklore. That night, the temperature had dropped to -20 degrees, and the sea was unusually calm, too calm, as the old sailors would say. Eric and I were about 4 hours into our shift when we first noticed something strange. The northern lights were particularly active, their green and purple ribbons painting the sky. But among them, we saw something different. At first, we thought it was just another fishing vessel's lights in the distance, but the movement was wrong. These lights didn't bounce with the waves. They moved with an unnatural precision, like they were being guided by an unseen hand. They had an odd bluish-white color, reminiscent of the ghost lights the old fishermen call Esjavader, sea spirits. As we watched, transfixed, the lights began moving toward our boat. Eric, who'd spent his entire life on these waters, grabbed my arm. "Cut the engine," he whispered, his voice trembling. I'd never seen him scared before, but there was real fear in his eyes. I did as he said, and we drifted in the absolute silence that only exists in the Arctic night. The lights grew closer, and that's when we noticed they weren't above the water, they were moving through it. Deep beneath the surface, these brilliant points of light swirled in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, like they were writing in an ancient script we couldn't understand. The water around them didn't just glow. It seemed to be alive with some kind of energy that made the air crackle with electricity. Suddenly, the lights shot straight upward, breaking the surface without making a sound or splash. They hovered at eye level, and in their glow, I saw something that still haunts my dreams. Within the lights were figures, translucent shapes that resembled ancient Viking warriors, their forms shifting and flowing like smoke on water. Their eyes glowed with the same ethereal blue-white light, and their armor seemed to be made of ice and starlight. Eric started muttering an old prayer his grandmother had taught him, something about the guardians of the northern waters. The figures turned toward us, and in that moment I felt a presence in my mind, ancient, powerful, and utterly alien. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It felt like being judged by something that had watched these waters since the first humans dared to sail them. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the lights plunged back into the sea. But instead of disappearing, they shot forward at an impossible speed, moving straight through our boat without causing any disturbance. The feeling was indescribable, like being plunged into ice-cold water and burning heat at the same time. When we checked our instruments later, we discovered that for those few minutes, none of them had worked. No radio, no radar, nothing. We didn't speak much about what happened for the rest of our shift. When we finally returned to port, we found several other boats had seen similar phenomena that night. The old fishermen weren't surprised. They spoke of the Vardøger, guardian spirits of the ancient seas, that appear during the darkest parts of winter. One elderly captain, who'd spent 60 years on these waters, told us that what we'd seen were the spirits of ancient Viking warriors who still patrol these seas, protecting their ancient roots and the secrets buried in the deep. They show themselves to remind us, he said, that we are not the first to sail these waters, and that some paths are still watched by those who came before. Years later, Eric and I still work these waters, but something changed after that night. We gained a deeper respect for the sea and its mysteries. Sometimes during the polar night, when the northern lights dance above us, we catch glimpses of those blue-white lights moving beneath the waves. We don't chase them anymore. Some things in this world aren't meant to be understood, only witnessed and remembered. Now, when young crew members ask us about the strange lights they sometimes see in the depths, we tell them what the old fishermen told us. These waters have memories, and sometimes, on the darkest nights, those memories take form and remind us that the ancient stories aren't just stories after all. I love road trips through the Carpathian Mountains, especially those winding paths that connect the ancient villages of Transylvania. There's something magical about getting up before dawn and driving through these mist-covered peaks. However, there are moments in the dead of winter when time seems to thin and reality blurs at the edges. I'd like to share 3 encounters with what locals call the singing between, experiences that changed how I understand these mountains forever. The first encounter happened during my drive from Sayasora to Brasov. I was making good progress through the snow-covered pass when I heard it. Not the usual howling of winter wind through the peaks, but something else entirely. A woman's voice, singing an old Romanian ballad. The melody was hauntingly familiar. The kind grandmothers sing to children about ancient heroes and forest spirits. But there was something wrong about it, something that made my skin crawl. The singing grew louder, mixing with what sounded like wolf howls, but distorted, as if the wolves were trying to harmonize with the ethereal voice. Then came a sound like steel being torn apart, a screech that cut through the night air like a blade. I pulled over at a small turnout, my hands shaking on the wheel. Before I could process what was happening, a wall of snow swept across the road ahead of me. A sudden avalanche that would have caught my car if I hadn't stopped. The singing faded, leaving only the echo of wolves in the distance. An old shepherd I met later at a mountain nodded knowingly when I told him. "The singing saved you," he said. "She warns travelers when the mountains are hungry." The second time was different. I was driving through Piatra Craiului at midnight, taking the mountain route to avoid holiday traffic. The moon was full, casting silver light on the snow-covered peaks, when I heard it again. This time the voice was deeper, more ancient, singing what sounded like a funeral dirge in a dialect I couldn't quite place. The wolves joined in again, but their howls seemed to form words this time, creating a chorus that spoke of danger ahead. I slowed down, and just as the singing reached a crescendo, I saw it. A massive logging truck had jackknifed across the road, completely invisible from around the bend. If I hadn't slowed down, I would have crashed right into it. But it was the third encounter that truly shook me to my core. I was crossing the Fagaras Mountains during a bitter winter storm. The singing started faint, almost lost in the howling wind. It was a chorus this time, multiple voices singing in harmony, their song weaving with the wolves' howls to create something both beautiful and terrifying. The voices seemed to be saying 13 in ancient Romanian, over and over, woven into their ethereal melody. I knew enough by then to heed the warning. I took the next exit and found shelter at a small monastery, even though it was only 7 in the evening, and I'd been driving less than 9 hours. The next morning, as I continued my journey, I counted them 12 vehicles that had slid off the icy road during the night, each one torn open, as if something with massive claws had peeled back the metal. The 13th space, where I might have been, remained empty. The old monks at the monastery weren't surprised by my story. They spoke of the singing guardians, spirits of travelers who had perished in these mountains centuries ago, who now try to protect others from sharing their fate. The wolves that sing with them, they said, are not ordinary wolves, but something older, something that has guarded these passes since before humans built their first settlements here. I still drive these mountain roads, but I've learned to listen more carefully now. When the wind changes and the wolves begin to howl, I pay attention. Sometimes, just as dusk is falling, I catch fragments of that ancient singing carried on the winter wind. The locals say the mountains remember every traveler they've taken, and sometimes they choose to spare those who listen to their warnings. The song is out there, echoing between the peaks, mixing with the howls of wolves that might not be wolves at all. Some say it's just the wind, others claim it's the mountains themselves singing. But I know what I've heard, and I know that in these ancient passes, between the old villages and forgotten paths, there are still powers that watch over travelers, still voices that sing out warnings to those wise enough to listen. So if you're ever driving through the Carpathians in winter, and you hear singing mixing with the howls of wolves, pay attention. The mountains are trying to tell you something, and in these ancient peaks, ignoring such warnings can be fatal. This happened in a small fishing village north of Aberdeen, Scotland. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, but also where ancient secrets lie buried beneath generations of silence. The village might as well have been frozen in time, old stone houses facing the merciless North Sea, fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, and the persistent smell of salt and smoked fish in the air. Walking through this village at 11 at night, heading to my friend Heather's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The fog had rolled in thick from the sea, and the street lamps cast eerie halos in the mist. The road I was walking was lined with old fishermen's cottages, their windows dark and shuttered against the night. I was about halfway to Heather's when I passed the old smokehouse. It stood on the outskirts of the village, a looming Victorian-era building that hadn't been used properly in decades. Its windows were cracked, the paint peeling off in long strips, and the whole place was strangled by overgrown seagrass. A rusted sign barely clung to the facade. Macpherson's famous smoked fish, it read, though nobody remembered any Macphersons in the village. There was something about that smokehouse that always unsettled me. The locals avoided it, though nobody ever said why. It was one of those places that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I'd never seen anyone go in or out, and I'd never known who owned it. As I was walking past that night, I heard a noise coming from inside. At first, I thought it might be the wind or maybe a seabird that had found its way in. But then the sound became clearer, more mechanical, like the old smoking racks being moved. I should have kept walking, but curiosity got the better of me. I slowed down, straining to see through the grimy windows. The air was thick with the smell of old fish and salt, and there was an eerie silence between those strange sounds. Suddenly, I heard a car engine start up from the side of the building, just out of sight. My heart skipped a beat. The faint glow of headlights moved slowly around the side of the building. Whoever it was, they were being deliberately quiet. Then two men emerged from the shadows, massive, broad-shouldered figures, dressed in old fishermen's gear. They were carrying something between them, wrapped in what looked like old fishing nets. It was heavy, too heavy to be fish or equipment. At first, I didn't move. I just stood there in the dark, frozen. What was I seeing? Why were these men carrying a mysterious bundle from an abandoned smokehouse in the middle of the night? Then one of them glanced over and saw me. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, everything in my body screamed at me to run. "Hey," the man shouted. That was enough. I turned and ran faster than I ever had, my feet pounding against the wet cobblestones. I could hear the engine roar to life behind me, tires screeching on the ancient street. I ran through narrow alleys between the old houses, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I didn't stop until I reached Heather's house, and I didn't tell her what happened at first. I wasn't sure if it was a real threat or if I was just being paranoid. But the next morning, everything changed. As I walked past the smokehouse again, my heart dropped into my stomach. Police cars were parked outside, their lights reflecting off the morning mist. Yellow crime scene tape was strung across the entrance, and two officers were talking to a woman who was crying uncontrollably. I later learned the horrible truth. The smokehouse wasn't just abandoned. It had been used by a secret society of smugglers, people who'd been operating in the village for generations. They weren't just smuggling goods, though. Bobby Sutherland, a local fisherman who'd been trying to expose their operations, had gone missing. The bundle I'd seen them carrying. It was Bobby. He'd been asking too many questions, trying to break away from their operation. Once you're in with these people, there's only one way out. The village had known about them for years. The Silent Men, they called them. A group that had been operating since the old smuggling days, using the fishing industry as a cover. The investigation uncovered something even darker. The smokehouse had been their base of operations for decades. The police found evidence of other disappearances, all tied to this group. Their network stretched beyond our little village, connecting to larger operations across Scotland's coast. Years later, the truth about the Silent Men emerged. They weren't just ordinary smugglers. They were part of an ancient brotherhood that had controlled these waters since the time of the Highland clearances. They had connections everywhere in the fishing fleet, in the Coast Guard, even in the police force. Bobby's death changed something in the village. The old smokehouse was finally torn down, but its shadow still lingers. Sometimes, on foggy nights, people say they can still hear the old smoking racks moving and see shadows of men carrying mysterious bundles through the mist. I still live in the village, but something changed after that night. We all knew the darkness that had been quietly simmering beneath our everyday lives. The old fishermen still won't talk about the silent men, but their silence speaks volumes. Some secrets are buried too deep in these coastal communities, written in salt and blood, passed down through generations of knowing glances and whispered warnings. The sea holds many secrets, they say, but sometimes the darkest ones are right here on shore, hidden behind weathered walls and rusted signs, in places where the past never truly dies. I still can't believe this happened, but every word is true. I'm a theater actor in Galway, Ireland, where the line between drama and real life often blurs in the most unexpected ways. This story begins at the historic Royal Theatre, where centuries of performances have left their mark on every creaking floorboard and worn velvet curtain. I met Maeve during rehearsals for a modern adaptation of an old Irish folk tale. She played the Fairy Queen, and I was cast as the mortal who falls under her spell, quite fitting, as it turned out. She was brilliant on stage, bringing an otherworldly quality to her performance that seemed to transcend mere acting. We connected immediately, sharing late-night conversations about theater and life in the empty auditorium after rehearsals. Our romance bloomed among the props and costume rooms, stealing kisses between scenes and sharing whispered words in the wings. The other cast members would joke that we were living our own fairy tale. For 3 months, everything seemed perfect. But like many stories in Irish theater, what appears magical often harbors darker undertones. The first signs of trouble appeared subtly, like the opening notes of a tragic play. Maeve began changing lines during performances, adding cryptic references to children and motherhood that weren't in the script. She'd sometimes stay in character long after the curtain fell, speaking in riddles about future generations and ancient bloodlines. Then came the announcement that shook our small theater community. Maeve claimed she was pregnant with twins. Not just pregnant, but carrying what she called children of the stage, destined to continue our theatrical legacy. The news spread through the company like wildfire, but something felt off about the whole situation. What made it even stranger was her immediate insistence that she wanted to give the babies to our director, Seamus. He and his wife had been struggling with fertility issues, and Maeve somehow knew this intimate detail of their lives. She began weaving elaborate stories about how these children would be raised in the theater, learning its magic from birth. I mentioned this bizarre situation to Seamus, who had no idea what I was talking about. He was completely blindsided by the whole thing. I started to feel like I was trapped in one of the dark folk tales we performed, where nothing is quite what it seems. Weeks passed, and Maeve's performance both on and off stage became increasingly erratic. She started posting cryptic messages on the theater's message board about ancient Irish fertility rites and the magic of theatrical bloodlines. She wrote about how I had abandoned her and our unborn theatrical heirs, how I was betraying centuries of stage tradition. The other actors began taking sides. Some believed her elaborate tales, especially when she would perform emotional monologues about her condition during rehearsal breaks. Seamus's wife became emotionally invested in the idea of adopting these magical theater twins, seeing it as a sign from the old gods of the stage. Then, 4 months into this increasingly bizarre situation, Meve made a devastating announcement during the middle of a performance. She claimed she'd lost the babies due to the negative energy I had brought to the theater. According to her, the ancient spirits of the stage had taken them back because of my lack of dedication to the theatrical arts. Seamus's wife was heartbroken. The company was in chaos. I found myself cast as the villain in a play I never agreed to perform in. The other actors, many of whom had been my friends for years, now passed me in the corridors with cold stares and whispered accusations about disrespecting the old theater traditions. A year later, the truth finally emerged. One of the younger actresses came to me after a performance of The Playboy of the Western World. Meve had confessed to her that the entire pregnancy had been an elaborate performance piece, her masterwork of method acting. She had wanted to create what she called living theater, where the line between performance and reality disappeared completely. The aftermath was surreal. Meve went on to join an experimental theater company in Dublin, where she continues to blur the lines between reality and performance. Seamus and his wife left the theater world entirely, too hurt by the deception to continue. The company was never quite the same after that season. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I missed. The way she would stay in character long after performances, her obsession with Irish fertility myths, the elaborate stories that seemed to draw from both theater lore and local legends. She wasn't just acting. She was creating her own reality, with all of us as unwitting cast members in her personal production. Now, years later, I still act at the Royal Theatre, but something changed after that season. We're more careful now about the stories we tell and the lines we cross between performance and reality. Sometimes, during late-night rehearsals, when the old building creaks and groans, I think about how thin the line between drama and reality can become, especially in a place where centuries of performances have seeped into the very walls. They say the old theater holds the echoes of every performance ever staged within its walls. Sometimes I wonder if Meve's elaborate deception is now part of that eternal show. Her fictitious pregnancy joining the countless other stories that haunt our stage. It's a reminder that in theater, as in life, the most convincing performances are often the ones that make us question what's real and what's just another act in the endless drama of human nature. I never thought my research into medieval Scottish history would lead me into such darkness. As a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh, I spent countless hours in the ancient library, surrounded by centuries-old texts and the whispers of academic pursuit. That's where I met Isla Grant, a brilliant scholar specializing in Celtic mythology, particularly the darker aspects of Highland folklore. Our paths crossed in the rare manuscripts section, where we both studied ancient texts about Scottish supernatural beliefs. At first, everything seemed perfect. Our shared passion for history, long discussions about Celtic legends, and evening walks through Edinburgh's cobblestone streets. The Gothic spires of the university watched over our blossoming relationship like ancient guardians. But there were early warning signs I chose to ignore. Isla had an unusual obsession with stories of possession and ancient curses. She would speak about them not as historical curiosities, but as living truths. During our research sessions, she would spend hours studying accounts of Celtic spirits that allegedly followed and haunted their chosen victims. After 6 months, I ended the relationship. It wasn't that she was a bad person. I just couldn't handle her increasing fixation on the darker aspects of our research. What I didn't realize was that ending things would trigger something far more terrifying than any ancient curse we'd studied. It started with text messages. Innocent at first, quotes from old Celtic texts about eternal bonds. Then they turned darker, referencing ancient Scottish curses and spirits that never let go of what they claimed as theirs. I tried to maintain professional courtesy since we still shared the same academic circles, but her messages became increasingly disturbing. One morning, I found something pinned to my office door, a hand-drawn Celtic protection symbol, inverted to represent a curse. Inside was a note written in medieval Scots, Thur art mine foryomer. The next day, another symbol appeared, this time with a lock of hair woven into the design. I started noticing her everywhere on campus. She would be standing in the shadows of the McEwen Hall when I left late lectures, or I'd catch glimpses of her among the bookshelves in the library. Sometimes she'd just watch me from across the quad, holding ancient texts about spirits and possession. The situation escalated when she somehow gained access to my research notes. I found them rearranged with strange symbols drawn in the margins, and passages about eternal bonds highlighted in what looked disturbingly like blood. She had written interpretations of my research that twisted it into evidence of our destined connection. I went to the department head, but Isla's academic reputation made them hesitant to act. She was, after all, one of the most knowledgeable scholars in Celtic studies. They suggested it was just academic enthusiasm gone too far. Then the real terror began. I started receiving packages, small boxes containing items from Celtic folklore. Rowan branches, iron nails, and stones with ancient markings. Each came with notes explaining their traditional use in binding unwilling subjects to their rightful partners. One evening, working late in the library's restricted section, I found an entire shelf rearranged to spell out a message in book spines. All texts about eternal possession and unbreakable bonds. Security footage showed no one entering the section, yet somehow the books had been moved. The final straw came during a department conference. Isla presented a paper about modern manifestations of Celtic binding rituals, using thinly veiled references to our relationship as case studies. She had documented everything, every interaction, every attempt to avoid her framing it all as evidence of ancient spirits working to keep us together. I filed for a restraining order, which was fortunately granted. The university finally took action when they discovered she had been conducting unauthorized rituals in the ancient history archives, using artifacts from the university's collection. Even after the order, she found ways to maintain her presence. Students would tell me she asked them to deliver messages, always quotes from ancient texts about spirits who never let go. She left Celtic symbols drawn in chalk outside my flat, each one becoming progressively more sinister according to folklore. I moved to a different part of Edinburgh, changed my phone number, and switched to a different research focus. But in this city of ancient stones and forgotten passages, she always seemed to find ways to remind me of her presence. I would find pages from old manuscripts about eternal bonds slipped under my office door, or hear whispers of her conducting rituals in the university's oldest buildings. Years later, I still teach at the university, but I've learned to watch the shadows in these Gothic corridors. Sometimes, during late evenings in the library, I'll catch a glimpse of a figure among the shelves, or hear someone whispering ancient Celtic incantations in the darkness. The worst part, she's now a respected professor at another university, teaching about living applications of Celtic binding rituals. Her academic work is still focused on possession and eternal bonds, and sometimes I wonder if I'm still part of her ongoing research. Edinburgh is a city where the past never fully releases its grip on the present. In these ancient streets, where centuries of scholars have pursued their obsessions, I've learned that some kinds of haunting are more terrifying than any ghost story. Sometimes, the real horror lies in how someone can twist knowledge and tradition into something dark and personal, turning the very stones of this historic city into witnesses of their obsession. I restore antique musical instruments for Prague's National Theatre, working in a small workshop near the historic Opera House. My job involves bringing centuries-old instruments back to life, carefully repairing violins, cellos, and other pieces that have seen generations of performances. That's where I met Milna Dvorak, a rising star in the opera world, and where my life took a terrifying turn. We met when she brought in an ancient violin she'd inherited, a beautiful piece from the 1800s that needed restoration. During our first meeting, I was captivated by her knowledge of classical music and her passion for historical instruments. She spoke about them as if they were living beings, each with its own soul and story. The first few months were like a dream. We'd spend evenings in my workshop. She would sing arias while I worked on instruments, her voice filling the ancient space with haunting melodies. Sometimes we'd walk through Prague's cobblestone streets at midnight, and she would sing softly to the medieval buildings, claiming the city itself was her audience. But then things began to change. Milna started showing up unannounced at my workshop, claiming she could feel when I was working on other musicians' instruments. She would stand in the doorway, watching silently as I worked, sometimes humming discordant melodies that made my skin crawl. She began tracking my movements through the city. If I was repairing instruments at the conservatory, she would appear in the corridor, her voice echoing through the halls. When I visited clients at the theater, she would somehow know exactly where to find me. "The music led me to you," she would say, her eyes intense and unblinking. The control became suffocating. She would send me dozens of voice messages, not speaking, but singing in increasingly disturbing ways. Ancient Czech lullabies at 3 a.m, funeral dirges when I was working late, opera arias distorted into something almost demonic. Then she started appearing at my clients' homes and performances. She would stand outside during private concerts, singing counterpoint through open windows. Musicians began canceling their restoration orders, scared of her intense presence and bizarre behavior. One night, I found my entire workshop rearranged. Every instrument had been positioned to face a single chair in the center of the room. On the chair was a score, a piece she had composed, using fragments of medieval Czech music. The notes were written in red ink, and as I looked closer, I realized with horror that it wasn't ink at all. I broke things off immediately, but that only made everything worse. She began performing dedication pieces at the opera house, twisted versions of classical arias, with lyrics about eternal possession and musical bonds that couldn't be broken. The other performers started avoiding her, disturbed by the dark intensity of her new compositions. She somehow gained access to my workshop after hours. I would arrive in the morning to find instruments moved, tuned to dissonant frequencies that music historians claim were once used in ancient rituals. She left notes written on centuries-old sheet music, using musical notation to code messages about how we were eternally tuned to the same frequency. I changed the locks, but it didn't matter. She would stand outside my workshop at night, singing those same disturbing melodies. Other restorers in the building complained about hearing violin music at odd hours, though my workshop was always locked. The final straw came during a crucial performance at the National Theatre. I was there to supervise the use of several restored instruments. In the middle of the second act, Milna walked onto the stage during another singer's aria and began performing one of her dedication pieces, a horrifying melody that incorporated sounds from my workshop. She had recorded the sounds of my restoration work and woven them into her twisted composition. I filed for a restraining order, which was granted after multiple musicians testified about her behavior. The opera house finally suspended her when they discovered she had been conducting strange rituals in the orchestra pit, using stolen pieces of antique instruments to create what she called eternal resonance chambers. I moved my workshop to a different part of Prague, changed my number, and stopped taking private commissions. But in this city of ancient music and Gothic spires, her presence lingers. Sometimes, working late at night, I'll hear distant singing echoing through the old streets. Music students tell me stories of a woman who stands in the shadows during their performances, singing harmonies that sound wrong in ways they can't explain. Now, years later, she performs with an experimental music ensemble, specializing in what they call psychic resonance compositions. Her concerts incorporate sounds that some audience members claim cause intense psychological distress. I've heard she uses recordings of instrument restoration work in her pieces, and I can't help but wonder if she's still collecting sounds from my workshop somehow. Prague is a city where music has power, where centuries of composers and performers have left their mark on every ancient stone. But now I understand that some melodies are better left unplayed, some harmonies better left unexplored. In these Gothic streets, where the past whispers through every archway, I've learned that the most terrifying songs are the ones that follow you home in the dark. My partner Fiona and I are archaeologists working on a site near Cardiff Bay, Wales. The location is fascinating, ancient ruins dating back to Druid times, partially submerged during high tide. What happened there one misty evening still makes my skin crawl, and I'm sharing this as a warning to others in our field. We were excavating a newly discovered section of the ruins when we ran into Garrett Price, a former colleague who'd left archaeology under mysterious circumstances years ago. He'd been brilliant once, specializing in Druid rituals and ancient Welsh ceremonies, but his methods had become increasingly unorthodox. When we found him at the site, he was already acting strangely, making unsettling comments about awakening the old powers and reuniting with the ancient ones. The late autumn weather was turning harsh, with a heavy mist rolling in from the sea. Garrett kept insisting on showing us something he'd discovered in a partially submerged chamber, something he claimed would change everything we knew about Druid practices. His enthusiasm seemed forced, almost manic. We should have noticed the warning signs sooner. The way he kept glancing at the tide markers, his obsessive checking of his watch, the strange symbols we later found carved into the rocks around the site. He made several crude comments about sharing energy and joining forces that made both of us deeply uncomfortable. When we tried to leave, saying we needed to secure the site before dark, he became increasingly agitated. He insisted we follow him to a nearby cave, claiming he had proof of something extraordinary. His behavior became more erratic, his speech pattern changing to include ancient Welsh phrases that seemed out of place. He made excuses about needing to check our equipment back at the main site, but he kept trying to persuade us. Then we noticed something disturbing: ritual items arranged in a circle near the cave entrance. Fresh chalk marks formed strange patterns on the rocks, and what looked like recently used ceremonial tools were carefully laid out. The situation turned frightening when he suddenly blocked our path to the shore. "You need to see this now," he insisted, his voice changing to something deeper, almost guttural. "The tide is perfect. They're waiting for us." Fiona, who always carries a utility knife for archaeological work, discreetly showed it to him while I kept him talking. She'd noticed something we'd initially missed: dark stains on his clothes that looked disturbingly like blood, and fresh scratches on his hands that suggested recent ritual activity. When he saw the knife, his demeanor changed instantly. He backed away quickly, muttering something in ancient Welsh about unbelievers and lost opportunities. We took that chance to leave immediately, practically running back to our vehicle. The next morning, we reported the incident to the site supervisor. When the police investigated the cave, they found evidence of recent ritualistic activity: burned herbs, arranged stones, and most disturbingly, fresh animal bones arranged in ancient Druid patterns. What really chilled us was what we discovered later. The tide tables Garrett had been studying weren't just for navigation. They matched exactly with ancient Druid sacrificial times. The cave he'd tried to lead us to was known in local legend as the Druid's Door, a place where, according to myth, ancient priests would conduct ceremonies to communicate with sea spirits. The police investigation revealed more. Garrett had been stealing artifacts from various sites across Wales, using them in increasingly elaborate rituals. His home was filled with research about ancient Druid sacrifice and revival ceremonies. They found journals filled with rambling text about bringing back the old ways and needing willing vessels for the ancient ones. We later learned that several other archaeologists had reported strange encounters with him at different coastal sites, always near sunset, always during specific tide patterns, always with the same insistence about showing them something in a cave or hidden chamber. The most disturbing discovery came when they found his research notes. He'd been tracking both Fiona and me for weeks, noting our movements around the site, our drinking habits, even our blood types. He had detailed plans written in a mixture of English and ancient Welsh, describing a ceremony that needed two joined souls during a specific tide phase. Garrett disappeared after that night. Some say he fled to remote sites in northern Wales, still practicing his twisted version of Druid rituals. Local fishermen occasionally report seeing strange lights in coastal caves during certain tides, accompanied by chanting in ancient Welsh. The investigation technically remains open, but Garrett hasn't been seen since. Sometimes, when we're working late at the site, we'll hear what sounds like ancient Welsh chanting carried on the sea breeze. The local people say that once the old powers have been awakened, they never truly sleep again. We still work at the site, but never alone and never near dusk. Some of the younger archaeologists have reported seeing a figure watching them from the caves during high tide. A man in modern clothes, muttering in ancient Welsh, always disappearing when approached. The ruins we're excavating have yielded remarkable findings about ancient Welsh culture, but they've also taught us something else. Sometimes the past doesn't want to be disturbed, and those who delve too deeply into ancient practices might lose themselves in the process. This experience still haunts me every time I visit that old botanical garden. What happened there transformed my perception of safety and made me deeply suspicious of any stranger I encounter. Even now, months later, my hands start trembling when I think about it. It was Earth Day when my best friend Mia suggested we visit the abandoned botanical garden on the outskirts of town. We often went there to hike and unwind, sometimes sharing a joint while exploring the overgrown paths. I'd always felt safe there. The place had this peaceful, ethereal quality about it. That was until that fateful day. The botanical garden was quite extensive, with numerous winding paths leading through different themed sections. Some areas were still maintained and frequently visited, while others had been left to grow wild, creating these incredibly secluded spots. Since Mia and I planned to smoke a bit of weed, we naturally gravitated toward the more private areas. We drove to our favorite spot near the abandoned greenhouse, which we called the Crystal Palace because of its remaining glass panels that sparkled in the sunlight. The parking lot was empty, which seemed perfect at the time. We grabbed our backpacks and headed down the trail, anticipation building as we walked deeper into the garden. The main path was wide and well maintained, but smaller trails branched off into the undergrowth, marked by old stone markers covered in moss. Our destination was the Crystal Palace, where vines had claimed the Victorian-era structure, creating this haunting yet beautiful sanctuary. The way the light filtered through the broken glass panels created these ethereal patterns on the ground. We found a secluded spot near the greenhouse where we could still see the main path through the foliage. Everything felt perfect: the spring breeze, the sound of birds, the warm sunshine filtering through the leaves. We sat down and I started preparing our joint. That's when Mia's expression changed. "Someone's coming," she whispered, nodding toward the main path. Through the leaves, we could see a figure approaching. We quickly packed everything away and moved deeper into the vegetation, waiting for the stranger to pass. After a few minutes of silence, we figured it was safe to return to the main path. We even decided to explore further, venturing into an area we hadn't visited before. The garden seemed to become wilder, more overgrown, with twisted vines and towering trees creating natural archways. But something felt off. The peaceful atmosphere had shifted, and I became aware of footsteps behind us. Looking back, I saw an older man walking the same path, and though this wasn't unusual, something about his presence made my skin crawl. The footsteps grew closer, and his pace quickened while Mia and I maintained our speed. To our right, there was a beautiful clearing with an old stone fountain covered in ivy. Mia pulled out her phone, asking me to take a photo of her near it. As I was trying to frame the shot perfectly, the stranger appeared behind me. "Would you like me to take a picture of both of you?" he offered, and my stomach churned at his proximity. He was wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt that might have once been white, but had faded to a sickly gray. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the light in a way that obscured his eyes, and his thin lips were stretched into what seemed like a permanent smirk. Being naturally conflict avoidant, I thanked him, though every instinct screamed danger. He took the photo, but instead of moving on, he lingered, standing uncomfortably close as Mia checked her messages. The air felt thick with tension. As we resumed walking, he fell into step beside us, so close I could smell his musty cologne. His first words made my blood run cold. "You ladies are quite beautiful out here in nature." His voice had this unsettling sweetness to it, like honey laced with something bitter. I kept my responses minimal, but he persisted with questions about our lives, our ages, where we studied, if we had boyfriends. We lied about everything, saying we were older and attended the nearby university. When we mentioned being a couple, hoping it would deter him, his interest only intensified. He began sharing disturbing stories about encounters he'd witnessed in the garden, his voice taking on an eager edge that made me feel physically ill. The breaking point came when he commented on the garden's seclusion, saying, "It's amazing what you can get away with out here. Nobody would hear a thing." His words hung in the air like a toxic mist. I texted Mia to make up an excuse about getting pizza, anything to escape this situation. But when we turned back, he turned with us, walking even closer than before. Every topic he brought up had sexual undertones, and his comments about the garden's isolation became more frequent and explicit. Through whispered texts, I told Mia to have someone call her and stay on the line. While she coordinated this, I discreetly opened my pocket knife inside my bag, gripping it tightly on the side away from him. My hand was shaking so badly, I could barely hold it steady. Mia got through to her father, carefully working our location into the conversation. Everything was going according to plan until her father, unaware of the delicacy of the situation, asked too loudly over the speakerphone, "Is that strange man still following you on the trail?" The atmosphere shifted instantly. Our follower's face hardened, his previous facade of friendliness vanishing like smoke. "Did you tell your father I was following you?" he demanded, his voice carrying a threatening edge that hadn't been there before. We came up with a weak excuse about telling her dad about someone we'd seen earlier on the trail. To reinforce our story, I casually mentioned carrying protection, my knife and pepper spray, when hiking, trying to appear more capable than I felt. The relief when we finally reached the parking lot was overwhelming. We said goodbye as calmly as possible and practically ran to our car. Once inside with the doors locked, we both screamed a release of pure terror and relief. I never reported the incident. Maybe I should have, but the memory of that day, the way he looked at us, the things he said about the garden's isolation, it all still haunts me. Every time I pass that botanical garden now, my heart races, and I wonder if he's still there, waiting for his next victims. Let this be a warning. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. That beautiful, peaceful garden transformed into a place of terror in mere moments. And I'll never look at secluded places the same way again. I still can't wrap my head around how someone could fabricate such an elaborate lie. But here I am, sharing my story to warn others about how manipulation can destroy lives in ways you'd never expect. I'm a pretty laid-back guy in my mid-20s, and until recently, I was in a relationship with Lisa. We dated for about 2 years, and while things started great, they gradually fizzled out. The spark just wasn't there anymore, but I wasn't devastated. Sometimes relationships just run their course. We ended things amicably in early summer, or at least that's what I thought. For the first month after our breakup, everything seemed normal. We'd occasionally text to check in. Nothing serious, just friendly exchanges. I wanted to maintain a cordial relationship. We had mutual friends, and our social circles overlapped. But then, out of nowhere, everything changed. Lisa sent me a message that would turn my world upside down. She claimed she was pregnant with twins. My first reaction was shock, followed by confusion. We'd always been careful, and the timing didn't add up since we'd been separated for months. But before I could fully process this information, she dropped another bombshell. She wanted to give the babies to my best friend Emma. Emma had been struggling with fertility issues for years. It was a sensitive topic, and she'd been devastated by multiple failed attempts to have children. Somehow, Lisa had gotten close to Emma during our breakup and had crafted this elaborate plan to give her the twins. When I mentioned this to Emma, she had no idea what I was talking about. Something felt terribly wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. My gut told me Lisa was making it all up, but who would lie about something so serious? Then the social media campaign began. Lisa started posting cryptic status updates about being overwhelmed and dealing with so much on her own. As weeks passed, her posts became more pointed, directly calling me out as a deadbeat who abandoned her during pregnancy. She wrote long, detailed posts about how I was causing her stress by not being involved, how she was facing this journey alone. The comments started flooding in. People I'd known for years began looking at me differently. Lisa's posts painted me as a monster who couldn't care less about her and our supposed unborn children. The narrative she created was powerful and convincing. After all, who would make up something like this? Emma, believing Lisa's story, became emotionally invested. She started talking about nursery colors and baby names. She'd cry while telling me how grateful she was that Lisa would give her this incredible gift. I felt terrible watching my friend build up hopes based on what I suspected was a complete fabrication. Then came the devastating post 4 months into the supposed pregnancy. Lisa announced she'd miscarried. But it wasn't just a simple announcement. She claimed her doctor told her the miscarriage was caused by the stress I had put her through. According to her post, the doctor said the emotional strain from our breakup and my lack of support had been too much for her body to handle. Emma was destroyed. She didn't just lose hope. She lost 2 babies she'd already started loving. And she blamed me. The friendship we'd built over years crumbled in days. She called me heartless, saying I'd caused this tragedy by not stepping up. No matter how I tried to explain that I'd had no knowledge of or involvement in any of this, people had made up their minds. I fell into a deep depression. I withdrew from friends, stopped going out, and fell into a lonely routine of work and sleep. I started questioning my own reality. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe I was the monster everyone thought I was. The truth finally emerged a year later through Jake, one of Lisa's old friends. He caught me at a local coffee shop and told me everything. Lisa had confessed to him that the entire pregnancy was fabricated. She'd never been pregnant, never carrying twins, never miscarried. She'd orchestrated the whole thing as some twisted form of revenge or attention-seeking behavior. The aftermath was bizarre. Lisa went on to have 3 children with another man within 2 years. Emma, who had been so devastated by the fake pregnancy, took a sharp turn in her life. She became heavily involved in the local party scene and married a younger man twice divorced. As for me, I'm slowly rebuilding my life. The experience taught me hard lessons about trust and manipulation. It's difficult not to be paranoid now, but I'm working on it. The betrayal cut deep, not just from Lisa, but from friends who were so quick to believe the worst about me without any evidence. I still don't understand what Lisa hoped to achieve. Was it revenge? Attention? Boredom? The complexity of her lie and the way she manipulated everyone's emotions was frighteningly calculated. She didn't just lie about a pregnancy. She created an entire narrative that played on people's deepest emotions and sympathies. Looking back, I realize how easily people can be manipulated when a story plays into their own hopes and fears. Emma wanted a baby so desperately that she never questioned Lisa's story. Others were so ready to believe in the narrative of the deadbeat dad that they never asked for proof. The whole experience has left me with a deeper understanding of how manipulation works and how toxic people can destroy lives if you let them. It's not just about the immediate pain they cause. It's about the long-lasting effects on trust and relationships. But I'm stronger now, and I've learned to watch for the signs of manipulation before they spiral out of control. I need to share this story because I don't want anyone else to experience what I've been through. If you've ever been in a relationship with someone who seemed perfectly normal at first, but later revealed an obsessive side, this might be difficult to read. When I was 21, I met Michael at a local art gallery opening. He was 28, seemed sophisticated, and had this way of making me feel special. He worked as a graphic designer, dressed well, and could talk for hours about art and music. I was young and impressed by his apparent maturity and knowledge of the world. Our relationship lasted only a few months, but those months were enough to change my life forever. At first, everything seemed perfect. He was attentive, charming, and seemed to understand me in ways nobody else did. The age gap didn't bother me. He never made me feel immature or inexperienced. A year passed after our breakup. I had moved on, started a new job at a marketing firm, and was building a life for myself. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, I received a message from Michael. He said he missed me and hoped we could catch up over coffee. I was single at the time and thought there was no harm in meeting an ex for a friendly conversation. We met at a small cafe near my office. The moment I saw him, something felt off. His once confident demeanor had been replaced by an almost desperate energy. He seemed intensely focused on me, hanging on my every word, leaning in too close when I spoke. When I mentioned I wasn't interested in rekindling our relationship, his eyes changed, just for a second, but long enough for me to notice something dark behind them. That's when the real nightmare began. The texts started flooding in. At first, they were harmless. "I miss you. We could make it work this time." When I didn't respond, they became more insistent. Then the tone shifted dramatically. "You've ruined my life. I thought you were different. I'll never forgive you for this." Each message felt like a stone being added to a weight I was forced to carry. I told him firmly, but kindly, to stop contacting me. That's when things escalated to a terrifying new level. He began sending me screenshots of conversations we'd had months ago, analyzing every word, finding hidden meanings that didn't exist. It was clear he'd been obsessively rereading our old messages, creating a narrative in his mind that wasn't real. The emails came next. Long, rambling messages, filled with accusations and memories twisted into something sinister. But the most chilling one contained a photo of me leaving my yoga class. A photo I had no idea was being taken. The thought of him watching me, following me, made my skin crawl. His threats became more explicit. "If you don't talk to me, you'll regret it. You have no idea what I'm capable of." That's when I finally went to the police. Officer Johnson took my statement, reviewed the emails and the photo, and contacted Michael with a warning that further harassment would have legal consequences. I thought that would be enough. I was wrong. I changed jobs, hoping a fresh start in a new city would give me peace. But 3 months into my new position, I received an email at my work address. The subject line made my blood run cold. "You can't escape me." Inside, Michael had detailed my entire daily routine, my commute, my favorite coffee shop, even the bench where I ate lunch. He ended with a clear threat. "I'll be watching you until you talk to me again. You can't hide." That's when I discovered he had gotten married during the 2 years since our breakup. After a particularly frightening message where he threatened to "make sure you never forget what we had," I made the difficult decision to contact his wife, Rebecca. She didn't believe me at first. Who would want to believe their husband was capable of such behavior? But when I showed her the evidence, the texts, the emails, the threats, the surveillance photos, her denial crumbled. Some of his messages were so disturbing that I couldn't even read them aloud. He had written about hurting me, about making me his again, whether I wanted it or not. Rebecca confronted him, but it didn't stop him. If anything, it made him more determined. He began following me openly, not even trying to hide anymore. I'd see his car parked outside my apartment building, or catch glimpses of him standing across the street, just staring at my windows. One morning, I found him leaning against my car in the parking lot, waiting. The police helped me file a restraining order, but a piece of paper couldn't stop his obsession. 9 years later, he still finds ways to contact me. I get messages from blocked numbers, sometimes just asking how my dinner was at specific restaurants I visited. He's seen me on dates, and sent threatening messages about eliminating any man who gets close to me. I've changed jobs multiple times, moved to different cities, switched all my social media accounts, but nothing seems to stop him. He always finds a way back into my life. I'm working with law enforcement again, but I can't shake the feeling that nothing will truly stop him. If you're reading this and you recognize these patterns in someone who won't take no for an answer, please take it seriously. Obsession isn't love, it's dangerous and destructive. I didn't understand that at first. I thought time would make things better, but it only made his fixation stronger. Don't ignore the red flags. Trust your instincts. And most importantly, don't hesitate to ask for help when things start to feel wrong. You deserve peace and safety in your life. Sometimes the charming, sophisticated person you meet is hiding something much darker beneath the surface. And by the time you realize it, they've already woven themselves into the fabric of your life in ways that are nearly impossible to untangle. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.